The sun hung low over Sundown Ridge, casting long, restless shadows across the weather-beaten boards of the Dustspill Saloon. Inside, the air shimmered with heat and dust, broken only by the steady clink of ivory on oak. Ilawan Wren Lockridge sat behind a makeshift card table, her posture deceptively relaxed as she arranged the deck with the precision of a surgeon laying his instruments on the steel tray. Each card glided between her fingers with a muted rustle, a sound she had come to regard as more familiar than the tick of the church clock in her hometown. Miles to the east, no one in Dustspill paid much attention to the quiet stranger who drifted in 2 days ago. Wren wore a simple linen shirt, her dark hair cropped close to keep the relentless wind from tangling it. Her skin bore the faint olive glow of her family's heritage, and her eyes were a peculiar shade of storm-gray steely, unreadable, as if they watched the world through a pane of frosted glass. When she spoke, her voice was soft, measured. She answered questions only when necessary, and then in a tone that suggested she weighed every syllable before release. The outlaws flanking the poker table were a different breed: Cordell, snakeskin. Barker lounged on the bar rail, spurs jangling like warning bells with every subtle shift of his boot. His partner, Jebediah Regic Blackwood, draped across the nearest chair, let his scarlet bandana fall loose around his neck. The third, Travis Reed, leaned forward, knuckles whitening as he watched Wren's deft fingers. They'd been mocking her since she arrived, whispered jabs about a lone dealer who couldn't hope to stand her ground if trouble found its way through the saloon doors. Wren felt their gazes but seemed oblivious. Inside, however, her pulse had ticked from a calm 2 beats per minute to a quiet hum of readiness. She did not flinch when Barker's boot scraped the wooden floor in a circle that brought his venomous gaze back to her. She did not hesitate when Blackwood's mocking laugh echoed off the low ceiling. Each card she dealt carried the weight of a promise. She was harmless until proven otherwise. The game proceeded slowly. Bets were raised, gold coins slid across the table, and onlookers drifted in and out, clinking tankards, swapping gossip about cattle drives, and the latest bank holdup in Fort Rourke. No one mentioned the stranger's past, and Wren preferred it that way. She'd come to Dustspill for a reason, whispers of a man who carried a fortune in his belt, a man with ties to her own hidden history. She would deal him cards, she would win his gold, then she would disappear again. As quietly as she had arrived, Barker leaned close, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. He pressed a finger to the wood, nudging Wren's elbow. "You sure you want to be dealin' in our town, missy?" he hissed. "Folks round here don't take kindly to strangers tackin' what ain't theirs." She glanced up just enough for Barker to catch the reflection of her gray eyes in the lantern light. She smiled, a slow curve of lips that spoke of hidden corners in her mind. "I'm only dealing cards," she said softly. "What people choose to lose is their own business." A ripple of laughter followed, cruel and dismissive. Blackwood stood, stepping around the table until he was close enough to whisper in her ear, "Don't think you're safe just 'cause you got that pretty face. Out here, decks can be stacked, and so can the bodies." Wren's hand paused, one card hovering above the table. In that breath, she felt the familiar tightening in her gut, the quiet lure of danger that called her name. Memories of smoky backrooms in Santa Lucia, of nights when her hands shook not with fear, but with anticipation, flickered behind her eyes. She remembered the weight of a Colt .45 pressed into her palm, the sharp report echoing off canyon walls. She remembered why she'd walked away, because every bullet cost a piece of her soul. She laid the card down, an ace of spades, and her gaze met Blackwood's. "I know the stakes," she said, voice still steady, though he could see the faint tremor in her jaw. "Are you certain you do?" Before Blackwood could reply, a new figure entered the saloon, Marshal Elijah Hart, his badge gleaming beneath a threadbare duster. Silence fell like a guillotine's blade. Hart's welcome to Dustspill Ridge had been brief, a warning about The growing lawlessness, a reminder that even red deserts had borders. He nodded to the outlaws, then to Wren. His eyes paused on her deck of cards, then slid to the 6 notches carved into her wrist scars she'd kept hidden under gloves until... Now the outlaws stiffened. Blackwood's smirk wavered for a heartbeat. Wren's fingers closed around the next card. "Seems we all have histories," she murmured. "But tonight we play by the cards in our hands." Hart strode forward, placing a hand on the tables. "Edge, no more tricks," he said, voice low. "This town's had enough surprises." A laugh bubbled up from Reject Blackwood's short, sharp like a pistol's crack. "Surprised yet, Marshal?" he taunted. "Because I've yet to see this lady so much as draw mineral water." In the sudden hush, Wren slid from her chair and stood. The lantern light caught the glint of steel at her hip, a Derringer, small but deadly. Barker's eyes flicked to it, remembering the stories of a card dealer who could draw faster than any gunslinger. Reed staggered back, sending his chair clattering across the floor. "Folks of Dustspill Ridge," Wren called out, voice carrying to every corner. "They say a dealer's true power lies in knowing her hand. But sometimes the quietest hand holds the deadliest card." She pressed her thumb to the Derringer's hammer. The outlaws' jeers died on their lips. Even Marshal Hart's steady gaze flickered with surprise. Then, in the hush that followed, Wren whispered under her breath, "Deal me the next hand." Outside, the wind carried the distant thunder of hooves. And in that moment, Dustspill Ridge understood. They had chosen the wrong dealer to mock. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." The Dustspill Saloon seemed to breathe with a life of its own after Wren Lockridge's quiet threat. Lanterns flickered as if to gossip among themselves. Shadows danced along the warped walls, carrying whispers of what had just happened. Word of the Derringer traveled faster than the wind that chased sand through the main street. Folks who'd been huddled at poker tables now leaned in, wide-eyed and half afraid to look away lest they miss what came next. Wren stood, unblinking, the small steel weight of the Derringer like an extension of her hand. She could feel the raw tension pressing in on her skin, 1,000 unspoken questions rattling inside every half-finished glass and nervous glance. Snakeskin Barker's boots scuffed against the splintered floorboards as he shifted uneasily. The first sign of a predator recognizing another apex threat. Blackwood's laughter came out strained now. "That pop gun?" He motioned to the Derringer. "1 barrel, maybe 2 if you're lucky. We got plenty more bullets between us." Wren tilted her head, gray eyes narrowing. "1 bullet is enough when you know where to put it." Barker spat. Onto the floor, the wet splat loud in the tense hush. "You talk a big game, card girl. Maybe you're fast, but luck runs out. And you," he jabbed a finger at her, veins pulsing at his temple, "ain't got the grit to do what it takes." "Marshal." Hart's boots creaked as he shifted his weight, his eyes flicking from Wren's calm face to the outlaw's jittery hands. He knew the signs. A single twitch would ignite the saloon like dry tinder. Outside, the distant thunder of hooves grew closer. Wren heard it, felt it through the floorboards like an omen riding on leather saddles. Trouble never came alone. It brought company and called it family. She slid the Derringer back into its hidden holster at the small of her back. Every man at that table leaned in slightly, expecting her to fold like a paper card in a flood. Instead, Wren smiled. It was not a warm thing. It was a thin, sharp blade hidden behind calm eyes. "You boys like stories?" she asked. Blackwood and Barker exchanged a look that said they weren't sure if she'd gone soft in the head, but no one answered. So Wren spoke anyway. "Once," she said, her voice rolling like dusk over the mesa, "there was a girl who watched her father die at the hands of men who called themselves businessmen. They held aces and 6-shooters in the same hand, she learned. Early that paper promises and silver tongues were worth less than a single bullet." She reached for the deck and began shuffling, the soft whisper of cards a heartbeat beneath her words. Her eyes never left theirs, so she learned to deal. First cards, then death. And she learned that every fool who thought themselves untouchable bled the same color when their luck ran out. The doors banged open behind her, another gust of wind, another swirl of grit. A lean, hawk-nosed man swaggered in, a bandolier slung across his chest like a mockery of a priest's stole. His boots left small dunes of dust with every step. "Marshal Hart," the newcomer drawled, his voice oil over gravel. "I heard you got yourself a showdown brewing in here. Thought I'd come see if the stories were true." Hart stiffened. "Stay out of this, Merrick. Last thing we need is your brand of help." Merrick ignored him, eyes fixed on Wren as if she were an exotic animal at a carnival tent. He sauntered closer, boots clicking. "Well, well. The famous Lockridge girl. Didn't believe it myself when I heard. Last I heard, you were ghosted out in Santa Lucia." Wren's lips twitched a ghost of a smile for a ghost of a man. Ghosts have a way of haunting the right folks when the time comes. Merrick barked a laugh. "You think you scare me? I rode with your daddy back in the day. He'd turn in his grave seeing you peddle cards instead of putting down these animals." He jerked his chin at Blackwood and Barker, who bristled at being called animals but said nothing. "Funny," Wren murmured, cutting the deck again. The Dust Spill Saloon seemed to breathe with a life of its own after Wren Lockridge's quiet threat. Lanterns flickered as if to gossip among themselves. Shadows danced along the warped walls, carrying whispers of what had just happened. Word of the Derringer traveled faster than the wind that chased sand through the main street. Folks who'd been huddled at poker tables now leaned in, wide-eyed and half afraid to look away lest they miss what came next. Wren stood, unblinking, the small steel weight of the Derringer like an extension of her hand. She could feel the raw tension pressing in on her skin, 1,000 unspoken questions rattling inside every half-finished glass and nervous glance. Snakeskin Barker's boots scuffed against the splintered floorboards as he shifted uneasily. The first sign of a predator recognizing another apex threat. Blackwood's laughter came out strained now. "That pop gun?" He motioned to the Derringer. "One barrel, maybe two if you're lucky. We got plenty more bullets between us." Wren tilted her head, gray eyes narrowing. "One bullet is enough when you know where to put it." Barker spat onto the floor, the wet splat loud in the tense hush. "You talk a big game, card girl. Maybe you're fast, but luck runs out. And you," he jabbed a finger at her, veins pulsing at his temple, "ain't got the grit to do what it takes." "Marshal." Hart's boots creaked as he shifted his weight, his eyes flicking from Wren's calm face to the Outlaw's jittery hands. He knew the signs. A single twitch would ignite the saloon like dry tinder. Outside, the distant thunder of hooves grew closer. Wren heard it, felt it through the floorboards like an omen riding on leather saddles. Trouble never came alone. It brought company and called it family. She slid the Derringer back into its hidden holster at the small of her back. Every man at that table leaned in slightly, expecting her to fold like a paper card in a flood. Instead, Wren smiled. It was not a warm thing. It was a thin, sharp blade hidden behind calm eyes. "You boys like stories?" she asked. Blackwood and Barker exchanged a look that said they weren't sure if she'd gone soft in the head, but no one answered. So Wren spoke anyway. "Once," she said, her voice rolling like dusk over the mesa, "there was a girl who watched her father die at the hands of men who called themselves businessmen. They held aces and six-shooters in the same hand, she learned. Early that paper promises and silver tongues were worth less than a single bullet." She reached for the deck and began shuffling, the soft whisper of cards a heartbeat beneath her words. Her eyes never left theirs, so she learned to deal. First cards, then death. And she learned that every fool who thought themselves untouchable bled the same color when their luck ran out. The doors banged open behind her, another gust of wind, another swirl of grit. A lean, hawk-nosed man swaggered in, a bandolier slung across his chest like a mockery of a priest's stole. His boots left small dunes of dust with every step. "Marshal Hart," the newcomer drawled, his voice oil over gravel. "I heard you got yourself a showdown brewing in here." "Thought I'd come see if the stories were true." Hart stiffened. "Stay out of this, Merrick. Last thing we need is your brand of help." Merrick ignored him, eyes fixed on Wren as if she were an exotic animal at a carnival tent. He sauntered closer, boots clicking. "Well, well. The famous Lockridge girl. Didn't believe it myself when I heard. Last I heard, you were ghosted out in Santa Lucia." Wren's lips twitched a ghost of a smile for a ghost of a man. Ghosts have a way of haunting the right folks when the time comes. Merrick barked a laugh. "You think you scare me? I rode with your daddy back in the day. He'd turn in his grave seeing you peddle cards instead of putting down these animals." He jerked his chin at Blackwood and Barker, who bristled at being called animals but said nothing. "Funny," Wren murmured, cutting the deck again. "I reckon he'd rather see me alive." She dealt the next hand, each card landing with a satisfying slap against the battered table. The Outlaws leaned in, eyes flicking to their fresh cards, but never straying far from Wren's face. Every flick of her wrist carried the promise that the next slap might be metal, not paper. Outside, hooves clattered on the boards of the boardwalk, and voices rose, strangers drifting into town, drawn by the scent of blood and the rumor of gold. Dustspill was about to swell with curious souls, all hoping to catch the spark when steel kissed lead. Barker slapped his hand flat on the table. A toothy night descended over Dustspill Ridge like a velvet shroud, swallowing the last rays of sun beneath the horizon. Lamplight flickered through the saloon's grimy windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced like restless spirits in the heavy air. The Outlaws, Barker, Blackwood, Reed, and Merrick sat frozen at the poker table, their eyes wide, hands trembling. Each bore witness to Wren Lockridge's quiet command, "Sit and play." Wren stood behind the table, the Derringer's butt peeking. From beneath her linen shirt, a silent reminder of her lethal promise. She spread her arms wide as if embracing the room, then stepped forward to deal the next hand. Her fingers moved with surgical precision, each card landing exactly as she intended. The Queen of Clubs, then the King of Diamonds, then the Two of Spades. Over and over, until the deck was gone and the Outlaws stared at their fates written in pips and numbers. Cordell Barker let out a tremulous laugh. "Ain't no hand worth this much tension, miss." Wren paused, eyes scanning the table. She saw Barker's sweat-soaked brow, Blackwood's rigid jaw, Reed's hollow stare, and Merrick's forced grin. They were as predictable as the hands they'd been dealt. She laid her final cards, a pair of aces face up. "I reckon this is the end of the line for your bets." Grudgingly, they pushed their remaining coins into the pot. Wren scooped them up without a word, stacking the gold in neat piles. The Outlaws watched her, their minds racing through threats unspoken, bullets unspent. Outside, a chill wind rattled the saloon doors. The distant howl of dogs echoed, a mournful soundtrack to the tension inside. Wren finally leaned back against the table, crossing her arms. "Now that that's settled, we have some business to discuss." Blackwood's voice was a rasp. "A lady's always got business, we know that. But it don't usually end with gold in your pocket." Wren's gray eyes held his. "You boys came into my saloon expecting a game, a laugh, maybe a victim to mock. Instead, you found out what happens when you choose the wrong person to provoke." She paused. "But I'm not vengeful, I'm efficient." Merrick snorted, though his eyes darted to the Derringer. "Efficient how?" "By sending you packing," Wren answered. "With a warning," she pointed to the door. "Walk out that door, no weapons, no coffers padded with stolen gold, and don't come back. If you do, I'll send you home in pieces. Believe me when I say this, I have no patience for fools." The Outlaws exchanged glances. Reed swallowed visibly. Barker picked at a loose thread on his coat. Blackwood stood, boots creaking ominously. He fixed Wren with a stare so cold it could freeze a man's blood. "You think we'll just walk out? After you humiliated us?" Wren shrugged, drawing the Derringer. The slide clicked in place. "I have no illusions. I know who and what you are. But I value my time too much to spend it on cleaning up bodies. Now go." A tense beat passed. Then Blackwood spoke. "You got guts, dealer. I'll give you that." He turned, nodded once to Merrick and Reed, and they filed past Wren, backs rigid, eyes averted. Barker lingered, then spat on the floor once more before following them into the night. Wren waited until the last boot heel clicked gone, then exhaled. Slowly, Marshall Hart crossed the room and placed a hand on her shoulder. Not many could have handled that. She met his gaze. "You did fine, too." His lips quirked. "Just doing my job." Behind them, the discarded cards lay scattered on the table, symbols of a gamble more dangerous than any gunfight. Wren picked up the queen of clubs, traced its edges with a fingertip, and slipped it into her pocket. Beyond the saloon, dust spill. Ridge stirred in restless sleep. Dreamers' dreams of gold, of power, of women with cold steel in their hands. And somewhere under that slumber, a legend was taking shape, one whispered in the wind, carried on the breath of adobe walls. Wren sheathed her Derringer, the soft click echoing through the saloon's hushed air. Then she returned behind the bar, polishing glasses as if nothing had happened. The Derringer faded into invisibility beneath the folds of linen. She poured herself a shot of whiskey, raised it in a silent toast to the night's work, and let the amber liquid burn a small path of warmth down her throat. Outside, the wind howled again, a warning or a benediction. She couldn't tell, but Wren Lockridge was used to living between warnings and blessings. She straightened her posture, wiped a glass, and leaned into the rhythm of her new life, dealing cards, watching shadows, and waiting for the next dance of danger to begin. When dawn finally arrived, pale and hesitant, it found Dustspill Ridge quieter than usual. Word would spread, and soon enough, folks would whisper of the landlady with storm-gray eyes and a Derringer in her hip. They'd know better than to mock her. They'd know it was safer to leave her alone. But legends, like ghosts, never stay. Buried long. And somewhere out on the dusty trail, new strangers were riding into town, drawn by curiosity and the promise of a story. And Wren, the dealer with cold steel in her hands, would be ready. The Dustspill Saloon didn't sleep that night. It held its breath while the wind scraped claws down its walls, rattling window panes loose in their frames. Outside, the moon was a sickle, sharp and pale as a bloodless wound. Inside, the smell of cordite and spilled whiskey mixed with the copper tang of fear. Wren Lockridge stood behind the poker table, one hand resting lightly on the Derringer. She felt the fine tremor in her wrist, a shiver no one else could see. Only the closest might have heard the thin rasp of her breath each time it caught in her throat. She wanted to sit, to close her eyes, but she knew better. The moment she rested would be the moment they pounced. Blackwood hadn't left. He leaned against the wall near the locked door, arms folded across his chest. His eyes tracked her like a wolf measuring a stag too stubborn to run. Barker's body lay across the table, face half hidden by scattered cards. They hadn't moved him yet. No one wanted to touch the evidence of how fast Wren's luck could turn deadly. Marshall Hart paced the room. His boots made a dry, steady rhythm. The heartbeat Wren forced herself to match. Each pass took him to the door and back again, eyes flicking to the street beyond. Out there, shadows moved, men called in by Blackwood's whistle. Outlaws and drifters drawn to the promise of easy gold and easier blood. "They won't try to break in yet," Hart said. His voice was hoarse, like he'd swallowed sand. There, waiting, Wren didn't lift her gaze from the Derringer. For what? Hart stopped at her side, glancing at the dead man slumped across the table. For you to lose your nerve. For the town to pick sides. A dry laugh slipped past Wren's lips, too brittle to warm the chill in her chest. Let them watch. I'm done folding. A crash at the back door made them both jump. A bottle slammed against the wood, bursting in a glitter of glass and cheap gin. Laughter rose behind it, sharp and feral. Blackwood's grin was a ghost of its former swagger. Hear that? My boys are getting bored. Maybe they want a turn at dealing. Wren's hand closed tight around the Derringer, knuckles pale. Her pulse stuttered. She forced herself to inhale, slow and deep, until the tremor in her wrist stilled. When she spoke, her voice was iron scraped clean of rust. This isn't your table, Blackwood. The outlaw pushed himself off the wall, boots whispering across blood-stained boards. He stopped inches from the table, eyes flicking to Barker's. Corpse like a man checking the time. You can't hold it forever, Wren. Even your daddy knew when to cut and run. She flinched, just a flicker of pain that showed in the lines around her eyes. Hart caught it. So did Blackwood. You know what your problem is? Blackwood's tone softened, almost kind. You're just like him. Think you can carry a town on your back. Think you can outdraw every man who comes knocking. But this town, it's made of dust and fear. They'll turn on you before dawn. Wren didn't answer. She turned her focus to the window behind the bar. The street was a ghost town. Lamps glowed in the distance, but no one dared show their face. Shadows moved behind drawn curtains, curious, frightened, waiting for the story to tilt. Hart put a hand on her shoulder. She tensed, ready to shrug it off, but he didn't pull away. You've got allies, he said. Don't forget that. She wondered if he believed it himself. They waited. Minutes dragged like hours. Boots thundered past outside outlaws riding the perimeter, testing the resolve of every door and window. From the balcony above the saloon, the sound of glass shattering rang out, a warning shot from someone loyal, or maybe just scared enough to take sides. Wren. She turned. A girl stood in the hallway leading to the upstairs rooms. A maid named Ruthie, no older than 20. Her eyes were wide, the white showing like a cornered horse. There's men out back, Ruthie said. Her voice cracked. They're talking about setting the stable alight, forcing us out. Hart swore. He looked at Wren. If they burn the stable, they'll come for the rest. This place'll go up like kindling. Blackwood's grin split wide, rotten and triumphant. Told you, one spark's all it takes. Wren stepped away from the table. The Derringer vanished into the folds of her skirt like a snake coiled at her hip. She brushed past Blackwood, close enough to feel the warmth of him, close enough to see the flicker of doubt that still lived behind his eyes. Lock the front, she told Hart. Keep him here. Where are you going? She didn't. Look back, to remind your boys that fire cuts both ways. The stable was a low, crooked building behind the saloon, half barn, half lean-to. The horses inside were restless, stamping hooves against dirt floors soaked with old straw and the sour tang of spilled feed. Wren could feel their fear vibrating through the boards as she crept along the side wall. Voices drifted around the corner. She crouched, boots silent in the churned mud. 3 shapes flickered in the firelight, a stub of candle burning on an upturned crate. One outlaw held a whiskey bottle, the rag stuffed down its neck fluttering like a flag in the night breeze. You sure she's worth all this? One of them asked. He was young, barely old enough to shave. His revolver looked too big for his hip. She's worth 10 times this, said another, older, meaner. Blackwood wants her scared. Wants her out front where he can break her proper. If we flush her out, we get our cut. The third man was quiet. His hands worked at the bottle, dipping the rag into the oily liquid. Wren could smell it, lamp oil and gin, a recipe for ruin. She slipped her hand under her coat. The Derringer's grip found her palm like a handshake from an old friend. She felt the cold weight, the promise it carried. She thought of her father, How. He'd taught her that words could save a man, but sometimes steel was the only sermon that made sense. She stepped out from the shadows. The dirt shifted under her boot. The youngest outlaw spun, wide eyes catching the glint of her pistol. He froze, caught halfway between the bottle and his gun. Wren's voice was low, steady. "Drop it." The older man laughed a hoarse bark that cracked the night. "What you gonna do, girl? Shoot all of us with that little purse popper?" She didn't flinch. "You first." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the older man lunged for his gun. The Derringer cracked once, twice. The older man staggered, a hole blooming crimson through his shoulder. The second shot missed, sparking off the crate and setting the bottle alight where it dropped. Flames leapt from the crate, licking at the straw. The youngest outlaw screamed. He stumbled back, tripping over the older man as the third outlaw bolted into the dark, the sound of his boots drumming a coward's retreat. Wren dropped to her knees, yanking the flaming bottle away from the spreading blaze. She smothered it in the mud, the oil seeping into her gloves. Her heart thundered like hooves on dry ground. Behind her, the wounded man groaned. The boy just whimpered, his hands trembling. Over an empty gun, Wren stood. Smoke drifted around her shoulders like a shroud. She looked at them, these boys who thought they were wolves but turned rabid at the first flash of teeth. "Tell Blackwood," she said, her voice so cold it made the night seem warm. "Tell him the house always wins." She returned to the saloon before dawn. Her boots left wet prints across the warped floorboards. Hart was still at his post by the door, revolver drawn but unused. Blackwood slouched in the corner, flanked by two of his remaining loyal men. They stiffened when she entered, but no one dared speak. She walked past the table past Barker's corpse, stiffening in the lantern glow. She poured a glass of water from the bar and drank it slow, letting it wash the ash from her tongue. Hart's eyes met hers, the question unspoken. She just nodded. The stable would hold. Blackwood's lip curled. "You can't keep this up. Sooner or later, someone faster's gonna come through that door." Wren's smile was thin as a knife blade. "Let them come. I've got cards left to deal." She holstered the Derringer, turned to the townsfolk who had crept from their corners to stand behind Hart. Farmers, ranchers, drunks, and gamblers. People with nothing left to lose. She placed her hand on the table. "I'm done running. If you stand with me, this town stands. If you run, he wins." The silence broke in a whisper. A single voice, then another, then a chorus of boots scuffing forward. No one spoke, but in their eyes, Wren saw the truth. Sundown Ridge had been dying by inches for years, its bones picked clean by men like Blackwood. But tonight, its heart still beat. And it beat in time with hers. A voice rose from the door. Warning bark from Ruthie upstairs. "Riders, more coming." Wren turned back to Blackwood. He smirked, but she saw the tremor in his hand where it rested on his holster. She drew a card from the deck, one she'd slipped in herself years ago. Its back was scarred, edges singed from some long-forgotten fire. She turned it over, the ace of spades. An omen and a promise. "Let's finish the hand," she said. Outside, the storm began to break. Hooves drummed against the hardpan road. Guns glinted in the moonlight. And inside the Dustspill Saloon, Wren Lockridge waited, the quietest card. Dealer the wrong men had ever dared provoke. The final hand had yet to be played, and when it fell, the house would take its due. Dawn crawled over Dustspill Ridge like a wounded animal, limping its way across the cracked roofs and battered boardwalks. The saloon windows glowed with a sickly light lamplight mixed with the new sun, painting everything in bruised gold. It felt like the moment before a wound splits open again, the hush when everyone knows the next shot is coming, but no one knows who will fire it first. Inside the Dustspill Saloon, Wren Lockridge stood behind her table like a general surveying a battlefield. She'd slept not a wink. Instead, she'd leaned her hip against the warped oak, deck in her hands, thumb flicking cards one by one onto the scarred surface until the pattern calmed the thunder in her chest. Every face card reminded her of someone she'd outwitted. Every ace reminded her of the bullet she hadn't had to fire until she did. Blackwood sat shackled to a chair by the piano, wrist bound to its leg with Hart's spare irons. His smirk had faded with the night, replaced by the sour sneer of a man who realized too late that his legend was smaller than the ghost standing before him. His boys, what was left of them, huddled on the floor, bruised and bloodied, but alive. For now, Hart moved between the windows, rifle barrel peeking through the curtains. Ruthie and two other townsfolk perched on the balcony above, clutching hunting rifles that looked older than the saloon itself. They'd sworn they'd stay. For Wren, for the ridge, but Wren knew they clung to their guns the way drowning men. Clutched driftwood, hoping it would float longer than they could tread. Bootsteps thudded up the back stairs. Hart spun, rifle half raised until he caught the broad-shouldered shape of Sheriff Declan Murch at the threshold. The sheriff's duster was soaked in dawn mist, his eyes rimmed red with exhaustion. "Road's clear down the south trail," Declan rasped. He dropped his saddlebags near the bar, the iron in them clinking like coins in a cursed well. Riders pulled back just before sunup. Maybe 20 more camped out by the dry creek bed. Blackwood's laughter was a low, cracked thing. "Ain't runnin', are they? They're waitin'. You know it. You, her, the rest of these dirt farmers, soon as you run dry, they'll come ridden in. Take what they want, just like always." Wren didn't look at him. She cut the deck again, 3 times hands steady. The Derringer lay within reach, glinting dully on the table. Its barrels were freshly cleaned, the oil still shining in the half-light. "Any word from the ranchers?" Hart asked, voice brittle. Murch shook his head. "Some say they're ridden this way. Some say they're waiting to see who wins. You know how they are, nobody wants to pick the losing side when lead starts flying." Wren's mouth twitched more a grimace than a smile. "Then we don't give them a side to choose." She stood, the chair creaking back. Everyone's eyes locked on her, some with faith, some with fear. Even Blackwood leaned forward, the chain on his cuff scraping the piano's paint. "What are you planning, dealer?" he asked, voice a soft hiss. "Gonna talk him down? That work for your daddy?" The name cut her like a rusted blade, but she didn't flinch. "No," she said. "He never did learn that word sometimes weigh more than bullets." She swept up the Derringer, the motion fluid as water poured from a jug. Then she tucked it into her belt, the familiar pressure pressing against her spine. "Declan, Hart, Ruthie, anyone who can stand meet me out front in 5. And bring every last bit of that courage you've been hiding behind your bar stools." They gathered at the edge of the boardwalk where Dustbill's main road split the town like an old scar. Dawn found them there, a ragged handful of townsfolk who'd spent their lives bowing their heads when trouble rode in with the dust. Wren stood among them, boots planted on the same cracked planks where her father's boots once dripped with blood and gun oil. She scanned their faces, saw the tremors in their hands, the dart of their eyes to the horizon where Blackwood's reinforcements would come, sooner or later. "You're afraid," she said. The honesty in her voice stopped the shuffle of feet. "Good. Fear is honest. Fear keeps you alive. But there's another side to fear." Ruthie, young and pale, clutched her rifle so tight her knuckles shone like bone through skin. "What side's that, Wren?" Wren swept her gaze up the road, where heat haze already shimmered over wagon tracks like a mirage. "The side that tells you you've got nothing left to lose." A laugh rumbled from the back of the not old Tom Ellis, the liveryman who'd buried 2 sons to the same road agents who now waited for dusk. "And what if we do? What if we've got homes children each other?" Wren stepped off the boards into the dirt, the hem of her coat sweeping the dust. "Then you fight for them. Because they won't run if you stand. And if you run, they won't have a damn thing left worth saving." She turned to the saloon's battered doors, where Hart and Murch stood guard. Blackwood's chained laughter drifted through the open gap. "Show them something worth staying for," she said, voice low to Hart. "Show them they don't need a badge or a legend, just enough grit to hold the line." Murch spat in the dirt. "Your daddy'd never—" "My daddy's bones rot in a canyon with all his aces spent," she snapped. "Mine are right here." She turned to the street again. The distant drumming of hooves rolled closer as slow. Thunder that set the hairs at her neck on end. A line of riders emerged through the morning haze, a ragged vanguard of dust and gunmetal. Blackwood's men 20 maybe more, if you counted the ones tucked into the alley shadows and lean-tos. A single figure rode at their head, coat flapping like a vulture's wing. Lucius Clay Blackwood's blood cousin, a name that turned grown men's eyes to the ground when spoken near the lamplight. He dismounted slow, deliberate, boots striking the hardpan like coffin nails. "Marshal Hart," Lucius called, voice a low burr that carried up the road. "Or is it the girl who runs this place now?" Hart stepped forward, rifle braced tight to his shoulder. Wren put a hand on his arm. "Let me." She walked out alone. Dust crunched under her heels. The wind caught her coat and snapped it around. Her calves, a phantom banner. Lucius tilted his head, pale eyes narrowing. "Lockridge, I heard you were dead." She shrugged. "They lied." He chuckled an ugly flat sound. "We don't want your town girl. Just you. You come with us, all quiet like, and we let the rest fade back to dirt." A murmur rose behind her, a shuffle of boots, the hiss of fear that grew legs when promises of mercy passed through hungry lips. Wren lifted her voice. It cracked like the barrel of her Derringer. "That's the thing about dirt, Lucius. It remembers what's buried in it." He blinked, confusion flickering in his eyes. "You think this town will fight for you?" She didn't answer him. She turned, letting her eyes rake across the line of half-shaven ranchers, barkeeps, girls who cleaned rooms for pennies a night. She saw Ruthie's quivering chin, Hart's stone jaw, Murch's hand twitching near his holster. She drew her Derringer and held it high. "You want my blood?" She called out, voice ringing off the dry boards and cracked eaves. "Then come get it. But know this, the house always wins." The first shot came not from her, but from somewhere behind Lucius's line, an overeager boy, finger heavy on a borrowed trigger. The bullet hissed through the dawn, burying itself in the saloon's porch post inches from Ruthie's ear. A roar rose from the townsfolk, half rage, half terror. But Wren moved first. Her shot cracked the stillness like a struck match. The boy who'd fired dropped to the dirt, leg shattered, rifle spinning from his hands. Lucius spat. "Take her." The street erupted. Gunfire shattered the hush of dawn. Wren felt the bullet snap past her cheek, tearing a line of heat that made her vision swim. She dropped to a knee, Derringer barking twice more. One outlaw reeled back. Another toppled from his horse with a scream. Behind her, Hart's rifle boomed, each shot measured, calm. Murch laid down covering fire from the boards. Ruthie's trembling hands steadied enough to find her Mark I rider's hat vanished in a mist of crimson. Through it all, Wren moved forward. She ducked behind a barrel, slammed another round into her tiny gun, felt the metal warm against her ribs. She knew she couldn't win this shootout bullet for bullet. She had to break them, make them see this town wouldn't bow. A shape loomed above her, Lucius, boots pounding dirt, revolver raised. Wren rolled aside as his shot splintered the barrel, the impact ringing through her bones. She came up hard, gasping, Derringer clutched in both hands, their eyes locked. In his, she saw greed, fury, the certainty that death was an acceptable price for power. In hers, he saw the glint of something older, a promise written in the sand by every Lockridge who'd come before. She fired. The Derringer's bark was swallowed by the roar of battle. Lucius staggered, a blossom blooming red at his gut. He dropped to his knees, revolver slipping from limp fingers. Dust remembers. She whispered around her. The gunfire faltered. Outlaws broke and ran for the horses they'd left tethered in the shadows. Some dropped weapons and fled on foot, boots scattering grit like frightened coyotes. Hearts shouted orders. Ruthie's laughter cracked through the smoke, half sob, half relief. Wren stood over Lucius's body. Her chest heaved, sweat and blood slick on her cheek. She looked back at the battered saloon, at the battered souls who stood between its walls. And oblivion. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. They'd held the line. But the night would come again. And Wren knew the next hand might cost more than she could bear to pay. The dust settled like old regrets over Dustspill Ridge, where there had been chaos and blood at dawn. Now there was the hush of bodies being carried away, boots scraping across splintered boards, and the faint rustle of curtains as townsfolk peeked through cracks, counting who had lived and who had not. Wren Lockridge stood on the saloon porch, leaning against a support beam that creaked with every wind gust. The Derringer, its barrel still warm, lay across her palm like a blessing and a curse. A streak of dried blood stained her jawline, Lucius Clay's final legacy. She hadn't wiped it away yet. It felt like proof that for once she'd drawn. First and survived. Marshall Hart stepped outside, tipping his hat back to mop sweat from his brow. He'd fought like a man with nothing to lose, and now that the shooting had stopped, his shoulders sagged as if the steel had been drawn out of his spine. He looked at Wren the way a man might look at a thundercloud that refused to break. Got the wounded in the boarding house, Hart said. Murch is doing what he can, Ruthie's helping. Wren nodded, gaze fixed on the stretch of road where the outlaws had fled. She could still see their shapes in the dawn haze, ragged silhouettes riding for cover, the promise of vengeance flapping at their heels. They'll come back, she murmured. Hart gave a hollow chuckle. They always do. Behind them, the saloon door swung open. A hush fell over the folks gathered inside. Word of her stand had spread, weaving through the streets like wildfire in tall grass. Some faces were hopeful, others wary. A few, mostly the ones who'd hidden while Lead Flew, looked at her, as though she'd invited the devil to supper and set an extra plate. Miss Lockridge. Old Tom Ellis called from inside, his voice quivering like a fence post in a gale. What now? Wren turned to face them all. The question was bigger than Dustspill. It was older than the town's cracked sign and the silver veins they'd once dug out of the hills. What now? She looked at Hart. He gave a slight nod, a gesture. That said, they're yours. Like it or not, she holstered the Derringer. Its weight at her back felt like a truth she'd carried since she was 15, watching her father bleed out on a card table because he'd trusted the wrong promise. You all stood your ground today, she said, voice steady but not loud. She didn't need to shout. The boards and beams of the Dustspill Saloon would carry her words to every rafter. You drew the line. They'll come again, Blackwoods people, others like them. They always do. But if they find us ready, they'll learn this place ain't for the taking. A murmur rippled through the room. Hope and fear, twisted together like barbed wire. Tom Ellis stepped closer. You think we can keep stand-in, girl? You think they won't just come back with more guns? More fire? Wren's eyes were flint. They can bring fire, but we've got our own. She glanced at the makeshift barricades stacked against. The windows tables upturned, whiskey barrels half emptied, oil lamps refilled and ready to be smashed if the wrong boots crossed the threshold. It wasn't much, but it was something. Marshall, she said, turning to Hart, send runners. Tell the ranchers if they want this town alive enough to trade with, they better send men and bullets, not just cattle. Tell the railroad men if they want to keep hauling ore, they better stand behind these walls too, Hart grunted. And if they say no? Wren tapped the deck of cards resting on the table beside her. Her thumb brushed the edges, each card. A blade waiting to be drawn. Then we don't bluff, she said. We show them the house will stand whether they back us or not. A fresh gust rattled the door. Somewhere on the wind, the sound of hooves echoed distant, but coming closer. Another scout, maybe. Or the beginning of the next wave. Wren didn't flinch. She turned back to the townsfolk. You want me to leave? Say so. I'll take the fight with me. They'll follow. And Dustbill can go back to waiting for the next wolves to circle. No one spoke. Old Tom Ellis swallowed hard. Ruthie stepped out from behind the bar, her apron stained with blood that wasn't her own. She crossed to Wren's side, standing. So close their shoulders brushed. You leave, Ruthie said, her voice trembling but her chin high. And we're done for. This is our place, same as yours. If the wolves want you, they'll have to take us too. Hart's rifle clicked as he chambered a fresh round. Well then, he said, a slow grin cracking through the grime on his face. Let's teach. The next pack what happens when they push the wrong dealer. Afternoon found them digging in. Boards hammered over broken windows. The old blacksmith's forge roared back to life behind the saloon, flames spitting sparks like curses as men and women heated scrap iron into makeshift barricades. Wren moved through it, all her steps sure, her eyes darting like a hawk's. She offered no false comfort. She told them where the weak spots were, how to watch for snipers in the alley shadows, how to load and unload the old scatterguns that had spent more years hanging over mantels than an honest hand's dot in the corner. Of the saloon, Blackwood watched her every move. The iron cuff bit his wrist raw, but his eyes gleamed with something dark like he'd found an old story worth telling one last time. Wren, he rasped as she passed near him. You think they'll stay loyal when the shooting starts again? You think they'll die for a card dealer? She didn't slow. Better than dying for you. His laughter scraped her spine like a blade. You're your father's ghost. He tried to save this place too. And when the bullets came, he bled out while they ran. She turned to him then, her shadow falling across his boots. Then they'll learn from that mistake. Blackwood's grin cracked wide. Or maybe ghosts just repeat themselves. By dusk, the sky burned crimson over the desert. Riders began to appear on the ridges, figures on horseback, dark against the sinking sun. Scouts, for sure, maybe more. Wren stood at the second-story window, Ruthie at her side, peering through a borrowed spyglass. More than before, Ruthie whispered. They keep coming. Wren said nothing. Her thoughts rattled like dice in a tin cup. Each man out there was a bet placed on her failure. Each hoof beat on the distant trail was a promise that someone, somewhere believed the Lockridge name could still bleed Dustbill dry. A knock at the door jolted them both. Hart leaned in, his face a mask of sweat and gun oil. Stagecoach coming in from the east, he said. Big one. No flags, no markings. Could be help. Or the end, Wren thought. She nodded. Bring them in slow. They stepped onto the street as the coach rolled into view, a lumbering beast draped in canvas and old paint, flanked by two men on horseback with shotguns across their saddles. The horses snorted steam into the dusk air. A woman stepped down first, tall and thin as a rail. Her hair was silver, but her eyes glowed sharp as cut glass. Lockridge? She called. Wren stepped forward, the Derringer hidden but ready. Depends. On who's asking? The woman gave a wolf's grin. Name's Cora Daltrey. Your daddy did me a kindness once, before the bottle killed him. You standing his ground now? I'm standing mine. Cora's grin widened. Good, got a coach. Full of munitions. And a score to settle with the bastards who think they can own every road in and out of this town. A ragged cheer rose behind Wren. Ruthie clutched her sleeve, eyes wide. Hart let out a breath that might have been a prayer. Cora leaned close, voice low. They'll come at dawn. You know that, don't you? Wren nodded. I know. Then, you best deal the right hand, girl. Cora swung back onto the stage, barking orders at her men to offload crates marked with old army brands and homemade dynamite. Wren turned to the townsfolk gathered behind her. In their eyes she saw what? Her father had never found something worth the bullet, the fight, the final breath. She raised the Derringer high. "At dawn," she said, her voice carrying across the dusty street, "we show them who holds the winning hand." As the last light drained from the sky, Wren felt the old fear slip into her bones. But it didn't weigh her down. It braced her. Up like a spine made of iron and ash. Dawn was coming. And this time, Dustspill Ridge would be ready. End of Part 6. The night before the final siege came down like a black cloth draped over Dustspill Ridge. The town held its breath as the desert wind rattled every loose shutter and carried the scent of cordite and scorched wood from the afternoon skirmish. In the battered shell of the Dustspill saloon, lanterns glowed like fireflies pinned to the walls, small, stubborn lights refusing to die. Wren Lockridge leaned over the poker table that had become her war room. Cards were scattered in front of her, arranged in hands that meant now except what they reminded her. Luck was just another name for the choices you made when the odds said you shouldn't win. Outside, the street was alive with the shuffling of boots, the muted clang of iron as barricades were reinforced with whatever could be nailed or stacked furniture, feed crates, old iron stove parts. Even the tattered sign from the Silver Spur Inn. Wren heard it all through the open window. The cough of hammers driving nails, the whisper of prayers muttered through cracked lips. Hart appeared beside her, his hat in his hand, hair wild from hours of patrol. His eyes looked older than they had yesterday, lines carved deeper than any outlaw's knife ever could. "Got the last of Cora's crates stowed near the stables," he said. "We put the dynamite where they'll least expect it. If they push the north side, they'll be sorry." Wren nodded, her fingers brushing the Derringer's handle. Its metal felt almost warm now, so long had it sat pressed against her skin. "Good," she said. "Any word from the ranchers?" Hart snorted, a sound half anger, half disbelief. "They're waiting, watching. Some of them want to see if you win this without him, so they can roll in later and claim they backed you the whole time. Some are just cowards." Her lips twitched. "They'll show. They always do once they know the winner." He dropped his hat on the table, eyes searching her face. "Ain't too late to run, Wren. Take Cora's coach, ride south. By the time they figure it out, you'll be halfway to the border." Wren turned a card over absently ace of hearts. "And leave this to you?" Hart's jaw flexed, the muscle jumping. "We'd buy you time." "No," she said, so soft it made him flinch. "No more buying time, not for me. Not for Dustspill." She reached for the next card, her thumb tracing its edge like a rosary bead. But when she flipped it, it wasn't a king or a queen or a spade. It was a slip of parchment hidden there years ago, her father's handwriting scrawled across its face. "Luck is just the name you give your courage after it works." Hart saw it too. He didn't ask what it meant. Some ghosts were better left where they lay. Outside, a voice called up the street. A scout, breathless. "Riders, lanterns on the East Trail." Hart's eyes found hers again. "It's time." Wren stood, gathering the scattered cards into a single pile. She tucked her father's note into her breast pocket, the words burning against her ribs like a brand. "Wake everyone," she said. "We deal the final hand at dawn." The barricades bristled with gun barrels and pale faces when the first riders appeared, black shapes etched against the pale wash of false dawn. Dust kicked up behind them like a funeral shroud dragged through the desert. They came slow, confident, the way men rode when they thought fear would do half their killing. For them, Cora Daltrey was already perched behind an old feed trough near the livery, her long rifle cradled like a baby. She chewed a sprig of sage, her eyes sharp as barbed wire. "Still think they'll talk before they shoot?" she asked Wren as they crouched behind a barricade of whiskey barrels. Wren's eyes narrowed at the lead rider, broad-shouldered, wearing a fancy hat too clean for the desert, his vest stitched with red thread like fresh blood. They'll offer a deal, she said. They always do. Give up the town, give up me, and the rest can crawl away alive. Hart grunted from her other side, generous bastards. A hush fell over the street. The lead rider Jonas Kingpin Yarrow pulled his horse up just shy of the barricade. The animal snorted, flanks dark with sweat. Yarrow's grin spread slow, a reptile smile under a polished hat. "Morning, Dustspill," he called. Out, his voice carried down the street like sour whiskey. "I see you got your little fort all set up. Looks cozy." No one answered. Wren felt the tension behind her like a wire pulled tight between her shoulder blades. Someone behind the barricade shifted boots, scraping grit. The sound seemed deafening in the dawn hush. Yarrow swung down from his saddle. He spread his arms wide, palms up mock mercy. "I'm a reasonable man," he said. "You folks give us the girl, the dealer. You do that, and I let the rest of you walk. Hell, I'll even leave you a barrel or two of water for your trouble." Wren stepped forward. The Derringer was in her hand before she'd even thought about it. She didn't raise it yet. Just let him see the metal gleam in the new light. "You think they'll trade me for peace?" she asked. Her voice was too calm for the tremor in her heart. Yarrow's grin widened. "They always do. Why die for a girl with a popgun and a deck of lies?" A flicker of motion behind her, a door opened. Wren didn't have to turn to know it was Ruthie. The girl's shadow fell across the barricade, rifle trembling in her small hands. "Not this time," Ruthie called out. Her voice cracked, but it carried. "You want her? You'll take us first." Yarrow laughed. The sound crawled down Wren's spine like ice water. "You sure about that, sweetheart? You sure you know who you're dying for? You know her daddy ran the same con, right? Promises of protection, promises of safety until the bullets came for him and he bled out alone on the saloon floor." Wren's gut twisted. She felt every eye behind her, every breath waiting for her to crack. But the Derringer stayed steady. "Funny thing about ghosts," she said. "They don't stay buried if you don't let them." Yarrow's eyes narrowed. "One last chance, Lockridge. You step over that line and come with me, and I won't burn this place to the ground." She stepped up on the whiskey barrel, boots scuffing the splintered wood. The dawn light caught her hair, her eyes, the pistol cradled like a viper in her hand. "You think you've got the winning hand," she said. "But you forgot who deals the cards." She fired. The first shot tore Yarrow's hat from his head clean, deliberate. The street erupted. Shots cracked like thunder on dry stone. The barricades flared with muzzle flashes, Hart's rifle barking sharp and sure. Cora's long gun dropped two men in quick succession before she ducked behind the trough to reload. Wren pivoted, tracking shapes in the dust. She heard Ruthie scream rage, not pain, and the bark of the girl's rifle as another rider toppled from his horse. Boots scrambled behind her. Wren spun as two shapes vaulted the barricade, knives flashing. Silver in the dawn. She brought the Derringer up. One shot dropped the first man. The second click echoed empty. Too late to reload. The second outlaw lunged. Wren sidestepped, felt the knife graze her side, the burn flaring across her ribs. She jammed her elbow back, felt the crunch of his nose beneath her palm. He staggered long enough for Hart to swing the butt of his rifle like a club, dropping the man to the dirt. "Reload!" Hart barked. She ducked behind the barrels, hands fumbling fresh rounds into the Derringer's tiny chambers. Her breath sawed in and out. Somewhere to her left, a scream rose, cut off by the hammer of Cora's rifle. Footsteps thundered close too close. A shadow loomed over the barricade. Yarrow himself, eyes wild, revolver gleaming. He fired once. Splinters rained down as the shot buried itself in the plank inches from her head. "Your father didn't beg," Yarrow snarled, climbing over the barricade like a beast. "Will you?" Wren's hand closed on the Derringer's grip. She felt her father's old note pressed to her ribs, the ink bleeding into her skin like a promise kept. "Luck," she said, voice raw, "is just courage with a second name." She fired. The bullet punched through Yarrow's chest, spinning him backward over the barrels. He hit the street with a grunt, gun spinning from his slack grip. Silence fell, but it didn't last. The rest of the riders saw their king topple and broke like dry twigs. Hooves thundered away into the new sun. The barricades shuddered with the release of held breath. Wren swayed on her feet, the Derringer dropping limp at her side. Hart caught her before she fell. "It's over," he rasped. She shook her head, dazed but alive. "No, it started." All around them, townsfolk emerged from doorways and alley shadows. Ruthie, her hair tangled with sweat and grit. Cora, grinning wide as she reloaded her battered rifle. Old Tom Ellis with tears shining in his whiskered eyes. For the first time in a long time, Dustspill Ridge stood on its own legs. Wren holstered the Derringer, boots steady in the churned dirt. The sun rose higher, catching the battered sign that still swung above the saloon door, and when she spoke, her voice was not a threat but a vow. "This table stays open," she said. "Anyone else wants to play?" Dustspill Ridge did not sleep after the dawn battle. The sun rose higher, washing blood from the street, but not from memory. The wind carried the scent of gunpowder through alleys and doorways where men and women stepped lightly, voices low as they gathered what was left of their courage. They knew the world would come for them again, stronger, meaner, drawn by the rumor that one quiet card dealer had humiliated killers with nothing more than a Derringer and a town's thin hope. Wren Lockridge sat at the poker table, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a stained cloth pressed to the gash in her side where Yarrow's man had found flesh. It burned when she breathed too deep, but the pain kept her sharp. She needed that. Ruthie hovered near her shoulder, pouring whiskey into 2 chipped mugs. She set one down in front of Wren. "Murch says you need stitches. Doc's on his way." Wren nudged the mug aside. "Doc's busy with folks who can't stand on their own yet. This can wait." "Bossy," Ruthie muttered, but she sat across from her, clutching the other mug with both hands like it might anchor her to the room. Hart pushed through the saloon doors, letting in a stripe of hard white sunlight that made the battered floorboards look older than they were. He had dried blood on his collar, not all of it his. In his hand he carried a wanted poster, the same one that had hung in the post office before this fight began. It fluttered onto the table in front of Wren. Her own face stared back at her, sketched in harsh lines. "Words out," Hart said. "Somebody pinned these to every post for 20 miles. They're calling you the Lady Ace now. Says you shot down Kingpin Yarrow with a Derringer half the size of his fancy Colts." Ruthie leaned forward, eyes wide. "That true? Are they really calling you that?" Wren's mouth twitched at the corners. "Don't sound much like me. Sounds like someone they'll come hunting." Hart dropped into the chair next to Ruthie with a grunt. He smelled like sweat, gun oil, and Dustspill Ridge's new perfume. "They'll come anyway. This was never about Blackwood or Yarrow. You cut into a vein of bad men who think they can claim whatever they want if they're mean enough." Wren turned the poster over, tracing the creases. "Then let them come. Dustspill knows how to bite back now." Hart studied her face, the worry lines deep as riverbeds. "What about you? How many times can you pull that trigger before someone faster shows up?" Wren shrugged, wincing at the pain in her side. "When the time comes, I'll deal with it." Outside, the street buzzed with uneasy energy. Cora Daltrey's stagecoach had been unloaded and converted into an ammo shed. Her boys stacked crates of powder like gold bricks behind the livery, while the blacksmith hammered a horseshoe into something that looked suspiciously like a gun mount. Cora herself strode through the saloon doors, hair tied back, sleeves black with grease. "Thought I'd find you sulking over your cards, Lockridge," she rasped. "Heard a rumor 2 of Yarrow's men crawled south to spread word you're still alive. That means company. Ren tapped the table with her good hand. How long? Cora shrugged. A day, maybe less. Word travels quicker than horses when there's coin on the line. Hart cursed under his breath. We're short on powder and bodies. Can't hold another siege the same way. Ruthie lifted her chin, defiant. Then we fight dirty. They all looked at her. The girl who'd spent her whole life mopping up spilled whiskey now stared down the devil's barrel like she was born to it. Cora snorted. She's not wrong. I've seen towns like this fold because they wait for the next boot to drop. Let's drop it first. Hart leaned forward, arms crossed. What are you thinking? Cora jabbed a thumb over her shoulder. Yarrows. Riders left a stash out at Mesquite Hollow. Food, ammo, maybe horses. They were planning on using this place for the long haul. We hit that stash, we buy ourselves breathing room. Maybe send a message to whoever's thinking of replacing Yarrow. Ren said nothing for a moment. She felt the heat in her side, the pulse of the wound that would not let her forget how close she'd come to losing this town. Her hand fell to the Derringer on the table. She ran her thumb over the metal, cold and sure. How many volunteers? She asked. Ruthie raised her hand first. Then Cora, then Hart, without hesitation. They rode out before dusk. 4 riders and 2 pack mules, loaded with dynamite and spare cartridges. The desert sprawled out before them like a promise that had never once been kept. They reached Mesquite Hollow by starlight. The place was little more than a stand of scraggly trees, bent double by wind and drought. Shadows flitted among the brushmen, smoking around a dying campfire, rifles stacked within easy reach. Ren crouched behind a split boulder with Cora. Hart and Ruthie flanked the far side, rifles ready. How many? Cora murmured. Ren counted shapes, measuring distance and wind. 6, maybe 7. Cora's grin gleamed in the dark. Lucky number. They crept closer. Ren felt the wind on her face, smelled the sour sweat of sleeping men, the acrid bite of whiskey that had dulled their watch. She eased her Derringer from its holster, felt the familiar slide of the hammer beneath her thumb. Then a twig snapped behind them. Ruthie froze. Breath caught in her throat. One of the outlaws stirred, blinking into the darkness. His hand reached for the rifle propped beside him. Who's there? He slurred. Hart's voice cut the dark like a blade. Nobody worth your time. The man turned just as Ren fired. The Derringer's crack woke the camp like a gunpowder storm. Cora's rifle spat flame, dropping the next man before he could shout. Ruthie squeezed her eyes shut and pulled the trigger. Her shot wide, but enough to send 2 men scrambling for cover. Ren didn't stop moving. She ducked behind a crate, reloading, counting the heartbeats between each shot. A bullet tore splinters from the boulder near her head. She rolled aside, came up behind a half-awake outlaw fumbling with his revolver. Her second shot ended him. Where he knelt, Cora bellowed something unprintable, dragging a crate toward the mules. Hart covered her, rifle booming in short, deadly bursts. Fire the stash. Ren barked. No trophies. Ruthie ran forward with a torch. Flames licked dry wood and canvas. A roar of sparks climbed into the sky. The hollow lit up like Judgment Day. A lone rider broke from the trees, boot heels drumming panic into the sand. Ren leveled the Derringer, squeezed the last round dry. The man toppled from his horse, crashing into the brush with a cry that ended too fast. They stood panting in the smoke, the night around them crackling with the sound of powder catching. Fire. Hart clapped a hand on Ren's shoulder. That'll slow him down. Cora kicked the nearest corpse. If it don't, it'll make the next gang think twice about picking up Yarrow's banner. Ren holstered the Derringer, her arm trembling from the recoil she could still feel in her bones. Ruthie stumbled to her side, soot streaked across her forehead. Did we win? The girl asked. Ren glanced back at the burning stash, the wind carrying embers into the stars. No, she said. voice flat but resolute. "We just evened the odds." She mounted her horse, blood seeping through her bandage with every shift of the saddle. "Let's go home," she said, and as they rode back toward Dustspill Ridge, the hollow behind them burned bright enough to warn every outlaw for 50 miles that the Lady Ace's hand had only begun to play. Dustspill Ridge smelled of burnt powder and fresh resolve when they rode back through its crooked main street. The sky was pale dawn again, thin gold scraping the rooftops, the wind dry as old bones. Wren Lockridge dismounted by the saloon, boots slipping in the churned dirt. She felt every mile of the ride back from Mesquite Hollow thrumming in her ribs where the bandages stuck to the crusted wound. But it wasn't the pain that weighed her down. It was the weight of every eye peering through half-cracked shutters, wondering how long the Lady Ace's luck would hold. Ruthie stumbled after her, face smudged with soot, hair clinging to her cheek in damp strands. She carried 2 stolen rifles slung over one shoulder, as if they weighed nothing. She caught Wren's elbow as they stepped inside the saloon, the dawn light smearing their shadows across the battered floorboards. "You should let Doc stitch you up proper," Ruthie whispered. "You're bleeding through again." Wren brushed her off with a grunt that wasn't quite a word. Inside, the saloon smelled of oil and dust and the sharp metallic tang of blood that hadn't quite been scrubbed from the floorboards. They'd stacked extra crates by the windows for barricades. Rows of half-filled kerosene bottles lined the bar like crude lanterns ready to be turned into fire if the next siege came too close. Hart sat at the corner table, rolling bullets between his palms. His shirt was torn at the collar, the thin line of a graze crossing his neck like a careless lover's scar. He didn't look up when they came in, just kept counting bullets like they were blessings. "Stashes gone?" he asked. Wren dropped into the chair opposite him. She pulled the Derringer from her belt, snapped it open, and began cleaning the chambers with a rag that smelled of whiskey and gun oil. "Gone," she said. "Won't buy us forever, but it'll make them think twice about camping on our doorstep." Hart finally raised his head. His eyes were red from the grit and smoke. "Word is, 3 of Yarrow's boys made it to sundown. Canyon, there's talk they'll rally what's left of the Blackwood gang. Maybe some drifters who figure they can kill a legend for the bounty." Wren didn't flinch. The oilcloth slid between her fingers, her thumb pressing the last of the grit from the chamber. "Then we don't give them the same game twice. We choose the ground." Ruthie sank onto the bench beside her. "What do you mean?" Wren set the Derringer down, its steel gleaming in the lamplight like a snake waiting to strike. "We make. The next fight costs them more than they're willing to pay. If they want Dustspill, they'll have to drown in it." Hart's fingers stilled on the bullets. "Folks'll have to stand with you again. Some are talking about packing up. Taking wagons east before the road closes." A flicker of hurt passed behind Ruthie's eyes. "They'll run?" Wren exhaled, slow. "They're tired. Tired people do desperate things. So we remind them why they stayed when they could have run." Cora Daltrey stepped in then, her boots tracking sand across the warped planks. She carried a shotgun over one shoulder, a bandolier of shells strapped tight across her chest like a corset made of iron and grit. "You want to keep him standing," she said. "Then you better give him something to stand for. Besides you." Wren's eyebrow ticked upward. "Like what?" Cora's grin was all teeth. "Hope or fear. Depends which they're better at holding on to." They gathered them at midday. Every able soul farm hands, stable boys, women with pistols tucked into flour sack aprons. Even old Walt, who hadn't drawn a sober breath since the last railroad job dried up. They packed the saloon floor, eyes shifting from the barricaded windows to the cards, spread across the poker table in front of Wren. Not one of them spoke until she did. "You've all heard the talk," Wren said. Her voice carried to the eaves, soft but sharp enough to cut through the muttering. "You know they'll come again. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. Doesn't matter. They'll come because they think we're too tired to stand a second time. A murmur ran through the room, fear, anger, a flicker of shame. Walt spat into a spittoon and muttered, "They ain't wrong. Some of us got kids. What's the point of standin' when they'll just send more?" Wren flipped over a card, king of spades, the corners worn to parchment. "The point is this. Town's been dying a long time. Long before Blackwood, long before Yarrow. We've been selling pieces of ourselves to anyone who'd pay just to keep the lights on. But they don't come for the town. They come for what we've got left, our pride. Our say in who takes what. That's what they can't stand." A voice from the back, Ruthie's mother, hands shaking around a battered old colt. "You saying we all stay and die?" Wren shook her head. "I'm saying if we stay, we fight smart. We take the fight to them. We decide how this ends." She looked at Hart, who stepped forward, tossing the wanted poster onto the table. Her own face, staring back at them with a bounty that would buy 10 years' worth of bread and whiskey. "They'll come for her," Hart said. "But they'll come through you to get to her. You stand, you make it cost them more than they're ready to pay. You run, she dies alone, and the rest of you watch Dustbill get picked apart for scraps." Silence. Then Ruthie stepped to Wren's side, chin lifted high. "I'm stayin'. Anyone wants to run, take your chance now. But you run, you don't come back." One by one, they stayed. Not all, but enough. Old Walt snorted into his beard, muttered a curse about dying where the whiskey was good. Ruthie's mother held her daughter's hand like she'd just found something she'd lost years ago. Cora clapped her big hands once, cracking the tension. "Then get ready. We reinforce the north alley and the stables. We wire the powder traps near the well. And you lot," she jerked her thumb at 2 stable boys, "you know how to handle the dynamite we got left?" They nodded, eyes wide as plates. "Good," she said. "You do what the Lady Ace says. You do it fast." Wren caught the nickname on a dozen lips as they broke off into groups. Lady Ace, Lady Ace. She hated it, but she knew it had teeth now. Let them say it. Let it crawl down the canyons and across the desert, all the way to the next gang who thought they could bluff there. Way into her town. That night, she sat alone at the poker table again, shuffling the same battered deck. Hart leaned in the doorway, watching her thumb the cards until the rhythm stilled the ache in her ribs. "You never sleep," he said. Wren turned over the ace of spades. "Not yet. You know what they're saying?" He crossed to the table. Voice low. "They're saying you're like your father. They're saying maybe you'll get him killed." She looked at him, eyes sharp as the edge of a blade. "Do you believe that?" Hart didn't flinch. "No, but they need to see you bleed and stand back up. Makes you real." Wren cracked a tired smile. "I've bled plenty." He touched the deck, a fingertip brushing the king she'd left turned up. "So did he, but you're not him." She flipped the card back into the deck. "No, I'm the dealer now." And tomorrow, bootsteps thundered outside. A voice, a breathless stable hand pounded on the saloon door. "Riders, East Ridge. Maybe a dozen. They're scoping us out." Hart's hand fell to his revolver. "You ready?" Wren stood, slipping the Derringer into her belt. The cards left scattered on the table like a promise and a threat. "I've been ready," she said, and as she stepped into the wind that whistled down Dustbill Ridge, she felt the ghosts behind. Her father's shadow, Yarrow's blood, Blackwood's broken grin, and knew they'd all learn the same lesson before the final hand was done. The house always wins. The East Ridge loomed over Dustbill Ridge like a raised fist, knuckles of jagged rock clutching at the dawn sky. By the time Wren Lockridge climbed the slope with Hart, Ruthie, and Cora close behind, the wind had picked up sharp and dry, whipping grit across the trail until every step tasted of salt and sand. Below them, the town crouched quiet, its smoke rising in thin, uncertain threads. Through her spyglass, Wren counted the shapes riding the far crest. shadows against the growing light, restless and hungry for the scent of a bounty. At least 15, maybe more. She lowered the glass and squinted into the wind. They hadn't come yet, they would. She could feel it in her bones. Heart shifted beside her. One boot braced on a boulder that jutted from the ridge like a rib. He spat into the dust. They're testing us. Seeing how many rifles pop up when they show their faces. Cora grunted. Good, let them count wrong. Ruthie hugged her rifle to her chest, the butt too big for her shoulder. The girl hadn't slept more than a few hours since Mesquite Hollow burned. She looked at Wren now, eyes wide under the brim of a battered hat twice her size. You think they're all one gang? Wren scanned the horizon again, watching the way the horses shifted. No, drifters. Cutthroats with no flag. They'll follow whoever promises the biggest cut. Or the biggest legend, Hart muttered. Wren ignored him. She holstered the spyglass and turned away from the ridge. They want to play it slow. We play it faster. Cora, get the dynamite ready. Hart, you run drills with the families. If they hit the ridge, we'll break their teeth on the climb. Ruthie frowned. And you? Wren's fingers brushed the Derringer hidden beneath her coat. I'm going to remind them who they're chasing. They gathered that night in the Dustspill Saloon. The battered place had become something more than shelter. It was a promise carved in bullet holes and scorched tables. Here, you didn't run. You didn't fold. Wren stood behind her table. She'd cleared the cards, replaced them with a map of the town drawn in charcoal, and spilled whiskey on the plank surface. Around her, a knot of ranchers, stable hands, and the remaining town folk leaned in. Their faces were raw with fear, but in their eyes, Wren saw the stubborn flame that had kept this place alive when every road said it shouldn't be. They'll come from the east first, she said, tapping the ridgeline with a bandaged finger. They think we're soft on that side. We're not. We wire the slope with powder and scrap. You don't let them get closer than shouting distance. She shifted her touch to the back trail. If they circle south, they'll try the stables. They think they can take the stock and starve us out. We're ready for that too. Cora's boys rigged the hayloft with traps. One match in the wrong hands and the whole pen goes up. A rancher's voice rose, rough and hesitant. What if? They don't scare easy. What if they've got more men than we do? Wren lifted her eyes to his. Then they'll find out what the last gang learned. I'm not what they think I am. Neither are you. The room fell quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Ruthie moved to Wren's side, her hand resting on the map's edge. We're not ghosts anymore, the girl said, her voice trembling but loud enough for every ear in the saloon. We're the house. And the house never folds. They broke before dawn. Wren walked the street alone for a time, boots crunching over grit and bloodstains that still hadn't washed clean. She could feel eyes on her from the shadows, children clutched by mothers in boarding house windows. Men who once laughed at her father's stories now holding rifles they'd never thought they'd need to fire. She tipped her hat to each one. Small courtesies. Small sparks that lit a fire under a town too tired to remember it could burn. By the time the sun rose, the East Ridge was ready. Wren crouched behind a pile of upturned crates near the top, Cora beside her with a stubby cigar clamped between her teeth. Hart paced behind them, flint and steel in his hand, one boot tapping out the rhythm of his nerves. Far below, the riders gathered. There were more than 15 now, maybe 20. They came slow, the way scorpions crawl when they know they've got a sting no boot can squash. At their head rode a man Wren hadn't seen before, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a duster the color of dry blood, a grin carved across his face like a scar that had never healed right. Cora's breath hissed through her teeth. You know him? Wren's mouth twitched. No, but I know what he wants. The outlaw raised a hand, signaling his men to stop short of the first rise. He shouted up the slope, his voice rolling across the stones. Lockridge! I heard you're worth more than gold now. Thought I'd Come collect the bounty myself. Hart muttered, good luck with that. Wren stood slowly, letting them see her silhouette framed against the brightening sky. She rested one hand on the crates behind her, the other on the Derringer's grip. Name yourself, she called back. The outlaw's grin split wider. Call me Carson, doesn't matter. I'll be the one who buries you. Wren tipped her head. Try. She kicked the crate behind her, and Hart struck the flint. The fuse caught with a hiss. A heartbeat later, the powder charge buried beneath. The ridge exploded, rock and dust blasting the slope into a smoking ruin. The first line of riders vanished in a scream and a thunderclap. Horses bucked and fled, scattering the second wave before they could draw iron. Carson reined back, his grin gone. He spat blood, fury boiling in his eyes. Regroup. He bellowed. But his men looked at him now with doubt sharp as daggers. Cora laughed, low and mean. 1 down, 20 more to go. Wren holstered the Derringer, her shoulders tight with the pulse of the blast still ringing in her bones. We keep the high ground. Make them bleed for every step. By nightfall, the East Ridge was a charred scar. Carson's men tried the back trail, then the stables. Each push met a wall of fire and lead. Cora's trap set the hayloft ablaze, catching 3 outlaws in the flames before the rest fled into the dark. Ruthie ran ammo up and down the barricades until her boots wore raw blisters on her heels. In the saloon, Wren leaned over the map again. Her vision swam with exhaustion, but her mind ticked like a pocket watch wound too tight. Every move she made now would echo. If she fell, the echoes would be gunshots down the spine of Dustspill Ridge. Hart slumped onto a crate, rifle across his knees. They're pulling back again. For tonight anyway. They'll come at dawn. They always do. Wren nodded, her fingers brushing the torn edge of her father's old note still tucked in her pocket. Luck is just courage with a second name. She looked at Ruthie, who sagged in a chair, eyes half shut but still alert enough to twitch at every creak outside the barricades. Get some sleep, Wren said. You're no good to me dead on your feet. Ruthie shook her head. You sleep. Wren smiled, weary but sharp. I've got cards left to deal. Near dawn, the final storm came. Carson's men rode in howling, drunk on desperation and the promise of her blood. Wren met them in the street, Derringer in her hand, Dustspill Ridge at her back. She heard the barricades crack, the saloon windows shatter. But she stood, boots planted in the dirt her father once swore he'd defend. The shots came faster than thoughts. Carson's voice roared through the smoke. Lockridge! Face me! She turned, saw his shape charging through the grit. A blade gleamed in his hand. Her Derringer rose. One shot slammed into his leg. He stumbled, but kept coming. Another shot. Another. Her chambers ran dry as he lunged. They crashed into the dirt together, the knife flashing. Pain lanced her. Shoulder heat and fire and the roar of her own heartbeat drowning the world. Then Ruthie's scream, a shot. Carson's body jerked above her, his eyes wide with the shock of a man who thought he was immortal. He toppled sideways, the knife slipping free of her flesh as he hit the ground. Wren lay there a moment, blood soaking her shirt. She looked up through the haze of dawn to see Ruthie standing over her, smoking rifle in both hands, tears streaking her dirt-smeared face. Behind them, the outlaws broke. Some dropped their guns, some fled. A few lay dead where Dustspill's people, her people, had made their stand. Hart's voice came from the saloon, ragged but triumphant. They're running. Wren pushed herself upright, teeth gritted against the white-hot pain in her shoulder. She felt the Derringer cold in her palm, empty but heavier than any iron should be. You all right? Ruthie asked, breath hitching. Wren looked at her, this slip of a girl turned sharper than any blade, and nodded. You deal a good hand, Ruthie. The dawn split the clouds, washing the battered town in light that felt like a blessing and a warning all at once. Wren stood in the street, her boots planted firm, the last outlaws vanishing into the far horizon. She holstered the Derringer one more time, the barrel still warm against her ribs. Dustspill Ridge stands, she said, mostly to herself but loud enough for the ghosts to hear. And the house always wins. Dustspill Ridge smelled of blood and scorched wood long after Carson's men scattered. By midday, smoke rose from the blackened ridge, a signal to every drifter and would-be gun hand that the Lady Ace's house was still standing. The sun climbed higher, burning away what was left of the chill, but it did nothing for the chill in Wren Lockridge's bones. She sat at her usual table, shoulder bound tight in a sling, a half-empty bottle of laudanum on the floor by her boot. The Derringer lay on the table like a prayer that had been half-answered, its twin barrels cleaned and polished by Ruthie's careful hands. Ruthie sat close, arms crossed on the table, her eyes darting to the swinging saloon doors every time. Boots scraped outside. Marshall Hart leaned near the window, watching the street through the cracks in the boards. His rifle sat across his knees. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. No one had the heart to mention it. They'll come again, Hart said, low and certain. A town that stands like this? It's a bounty all its own now. Reputation's worth. More than gold to these bastards. Wren didn't look up. She rolled the last cartridge between her thumb and forefinger. Then let them come. They'll find out the house never folds. Hart's jaw twitched. He spat into the bucket by his boot. You said that before, last week before that. And now the people are asking how long it holds, how long you hold. Wren let the bullet drop. It clinked against the Derringer. Sharp in the hush of the room. I'll hold, we all will. A door swung open behind them. Cora Daltrey stepped in, her duster spotted with dried blood that wasn't hers. She carried 2 telegram slips folded in one hand, her shotgun cradled. In the other. She dropped the slips onto the table in front of Wren. Word's out, she said. Ain't just drifters sniffing around now. The Ashdown boys are camped 20 miles north. Heard about Carson. Heard about Yarrow. They want the bounty on you plus a little extra for the story they can sell when they're done. Ruthie shuddered. The Ashdown boys? That's half a regiment. Cora shrugged. Less than that now. Word is you burned out one of their supply runs last winter. They remember. Hart laughed without mirth. Hell of a time to get famous. Wren leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling. How many? Cora perched on the table's edge. Too many to face on the ridge. They're smart. They'll wait us out, starve us, squeeze us until the inside cracks. Silence pressed down. The wind rattled the boards over the window. Wren could feel the town's heartbeat in her own ribs, fast, raw, afraid. If they buckled now, all this blood and smoke was for nothing. Ruthie broke the hush. What if they can't squeeze us? What if we break out first? Hart scowled. How? They've got the creek bed, the trails. Only thing open is the western mesa, and that's just good country for a grave. Wren's eyes narrowed something. Old and sharp flickering in the shadows behind them. No, it's good country for a game. Cora arched an eyebrow. What are you thinking, Ace? Wren pushed the Derringer aside, clearing the table. She grabbed a stub of charcoal and began sketching a crude map ridge lines. The winding trails, the broken teeth of the mesa. You want to catch a viper, she said. You don't wait for it to crawl into your bed. You corner it in the open where you see every move it makes. Ruthie leaned in, hope and fear dancing in her eyes. You want to take the fight to them? Wren's lips twitched. No, I want to draw them out. Make them think they're hunting me. Make them pay for every step. Hart watched her hand move over the map. What about the town? She glanced at him, that old iron flaring behind her tired smile. Dustspill Ridge stands. The house stands. But sometimes you deal the hand somewhere else. So the table stays. Whole. They moved under a half moon, slipping out through the broken east fence where the tracks faded into scrub and dust. Wren rode at the front, Ruthie at her side. Cora and Hart behind with 3 pack mules weighed down with crates that rattled every time the wind shifted. They made camp beneath a ring of boulders on the mesa's edge. The stars felt close enough to scrape the skin, sharp and merciless. Wren sat by the coals, the Derringer in her lap, the note in her pocket like a brand pressed to her ribs. Cora sat across from her, hands busy stripping old fuses and rewrapping them with oilcloth. "They'll see the fire." She's a IDWREN shrugged. "Good, let them come. A legend's worth nothing if no one can see it burn." Ruthie shivered at that. She wrapped her blanket tighter, eyes wide with the truth she hadn't yet learned to swallow, that hope and fear live in the same bone. Hart prodded the coals, eyes distant. "Your father ever run like this?" Wren snorted. "He never ran. That was his problem." Silence fell. The fire cracked. The wind hissed between the rocks. Somewhere out there, the Ashdown boys were shifting in their saddles, tasting the trail, feeling the promise of gold in the morning light. Wren closed her eyes and leaned back against the rock. In the hush, she could almost hear her father's voice, soft and bitter, a ghost that refused to stay dead. "Don't bluff what you can't cover, girl. The house always wins until it DOESN, single quotes T. She touched the Derringer's cold barrel, felt the scars on her fingers from the first time she'd held it. Not tonight. The first scout found them at dawn. A boy, barely old enough to shave, eyes wide with the thrill of the hunt. He crested the mesa's edge, rifle raised, then froze when he saw the single figure crouched by the fire, coat draped loose, head bent as if in prayer. Wren's hand moved before the thought finished. The Derringer barked once. The boy dropped. More shock than pain. She stepped over him, pressing her boot to the rifle he'd dropped. "Tell them I'm waiting," she said. "Tell them to come collect what they're owed." The boy scrambled, blood bright on his sleeve, and fled down the ridge. Wren turned back to Hart, who crouched behind the rocks, rifle steady. "Bait set," he said. Wren holstered the Derringer. "Good, let's deal the hand." They came at noon. A snake's worth of riders winding through the scrub, rifles glinting in the hard sun. The Ashdown boys, ragged, hungry, mean enough to think one girl was worth dying for. Wren crouched behind the biggest boulder, Ruthie beside her, fuse in hand. She watched the line of outlaws pick their way closer, eyes drawn to the empty fire, the saddlebags tossed out like a bribe. Cora's voice drifted low. "Almost there. Hold." Hart's rifle cracked once one rider fell from the saddle, spooking the rest. They fanned out, shots cracking against the rocks, chips of stone biting into Wren's cheek. "Now!" she barked. Ruthie struck the match. The fuse caught, and the old dynamite roared awake. The bluff behind the outlaws went up in a blast that shook the mesa to its bones. Horses screamed, men shouted. The line split like a snake losing its spine. Wren vaulted the boulder. Her Derringer spat lead one shot, 2 each finding its mark in the confusion. Cora's shotgun boomed behind her, Hart's rifle working like a clock wound too tight. They didn't chase the outlaws. They let them flee. Half the Ashdown boys vanished into the haze of grit and smoke that rose where the bluff had been. The ones left behind bled into the dirt-black marks on the land that would never wash clean. Ruthie's breath came in ragged gasps. She clutched her empty revolver, knuckles white. "Did we do it?" Wren scanned the mesa, her chest heaving. She holstered the Derringer with hands that shook only after the last echo faded. "They'll think twice," she said. "Or they'll come again. Doesn't matter." Hart clapped a hand to her shoulder, careful of the fresh bandages. "What matters?" Wren turned to the horizon, where the distant hills rose like the back of some old beast that had never been tamed. She touched the note in her pocket, the ink smudged now by blood and sweat and the weight of the years. "What matters," she said, voice low but iron sure, "is that the house still stands. And the table stays open." Ruthie smiled through her tears. And the house always wins. Wren's eyes narrowed at the red line of dawn peeking over the scrub. She nodded once, slow, the promise burning behind her ribs like a fresh wound. She'd carry as long as Dustspill Ridge kept its name. Deal's still on the table, she said. Anyone wants to play, they know where to find me. And the wind carried her words down the mesa, down the ridge, all the way to the shadows waiting for their chance. But for the first time in years, the shadows found something waiting for them too. The Lady Ace, the town that wouldn't fold, and a hand no gun could ever fully beat. Dustspill Ridge felt different after the Ashdown boys scattered. The wind still carried grit through the broken windows. The saloon still smelled of whiskey and gun oil, but something in the hush between footfalls had shifted. It was the hush of people who had bled together and knew they might bleed again, but wouldn't be caught standing alone. Wren Lockridge sat at her battered poker table, the old deck spread before her like bones waiting to be read. Her shoulder was stitched tight, and the sling kept her from moving too fast. Ruthie sat across from her, eyes half shut, a rifle leaning against her chair like a loyal dog. Hart leaned in the doorway, arms folded across his chest. He'd shaved for the first time in a week and looked like a man pretending he hadn't spent 2 nights counting how many rounds they had left. You know, Hart said, voice low, I thought when we sent the Ashdown boys packing, it'd feel more like winning. Wren didn't look up. She thumbed the edge of an ace, its corner bent, the ink faded from years of sweat and blood. A win's just the start of the next hand. They'll come, not them someone else. Ruthie shifted, her boots scuffing the floor. What if they send more than guns? What if they send lawyers or the railroad? Folks who come with paper and promises instead of bullets. Wren's mouth twitched at the corners. Then we play that game too. A creak on the stairs drew their eyes. Cora Daltrey came down 2 steps at a time, her boots heavy, her grin wider than her latest black eye. She dropped a bundle of letters onto the table. Some sealed, some cracked open like a vein. Got word from Sundown Canyon, she said. Old. Hank from the stage line sent you a bottle and a warning. Says there's talk out west. Some fancy man with a ledger wants to buy up what's left of this place. Hart cursed under his breath. And the drifters keep coming. Wren flipped over the next card, a king of spades, edges frayed. She looked at Ruthie. How many riders on watch tonight? Ruthie straightened. 6 on the North Road, 4 by the creek. I'm taking the ridge with Cora's boys. If anyone wants to slip past, they'll wish they'd never tried. Cora snorted. Girls got more bite than half the ranch hands I ever met. Wren reached for the Derringer on the table. Its barrel shone like a blade honed too many times. They want my name? Let 'em have it. But they'll learn fast this isn't about me anymore. It's Dustspill's hand now. The dealer changes, but the house holds. She stood, ignoring the tug in her shoulder. She looked out the window at the main street, where the sign over the saloon swung in the wind, half charred. Letters still clear enough to read. Silver card. Keep watch tonight, she said. When the next buyer comes to town gun or gold or contract in hand, they'll find the same thing. Hart's grin was tired but real. And what's that? Wren's eyes narrowed at the horizon. That the Lady Ace's Derringer beats any ace they think they're holding. Outside, the wind carried whispers through the alleys. Names, rumors, a story too good to die quiet. A woman with a pop gun who turned a dying town into a legend. It would bring more outlaws, more lawyers, more men who thought they could buy what fear hadn't taken, and the house would still stand. Ruthie watched. Wren holstered the Derringer and pushed the cards together. What now? Wren smiled. It was the smile of a player who knew the deck better than she knew her own bones. Now we shuffle. They gathered that night behind the saloon, oil lamps burning low, shadows long across the rutted yard. Cora. unrolled a rough map across an old whiskey barrel trails, creeks, fence lines, where ambushes might work if it came to that. Hart pointed with the barrel of his rifle. If they try to come in wagons, we flood 'em at the creek crossing. The new dam will hold just long enough. Ruthie tapped the old cattle trail marked with a smear of ink. They'll send scouts up the old range road. We lay glass shards there, kill their horses' hooves before they even see the lights. Wren leaned back against the post, arms crossed tight across the fresh stitches in her side. Her mind ticked through the deck face cards, hidden aces, jokers yet to be dealt. Every man who came for her thought they were holding the trump. And everyone left dust and bones in the same dirt. A sound broke the huddle hoofbeats, soft and cautious. Everyone stiffened, hands finding iron. But when the rider came into the lamplight, the tension melted into surprise. An old man bent and gray, hat brim drooping like a wilted flower. He carried a folded piece of paper, edges stained with travel. "Miss Lockridge?" he croaked. "Got a letter for you." Hart stepped forward, but Wren waved him back. She took the letter herself. The paper felt thin and mean, the ink spidery and precise. She broke the seal with her thumb dot. She read it once, twice. Her eyes stayed sharp. She didn't let them see the flicker of dread that danced in her gut. Ruthie edged closer. "What is it?" Wren folded the letter. "Railroad men. Not just land buyers now. They've got a judge on retainer. Claim the land title's no good. They want the saloon, the ridge, the creek." Cora spat. "They'll bleed us dry with paper instead of bullets." Wren slid the folded letter into her pocket next to her father's old note. She patted it like she would a sleeping snake. "They'll try, but a pen can miss its mark same as a gun." Ruthie looked at her, eyes wide. "What do we do?" Wren's grin was wolfish in the lamplight. "What we've always done. We play our hand. And if they want a bluff, they'll find out the dealer's always ready to call." She turned to the old man, who lingered on his horse like a crow waiting for her. "The storm to pass. Take a message back." His eyes blinked, roomy but sharp enough to know when a ghost was speaking. "What should I tell him?" Wren's voice was low, but it carried through the still night like thunder rolling in the distance. "Tell them the Lady Ace is waiting, and this table never closes." The rider nodded, heels tapping his pony into the dark. Behind her, Hart and Cora and Ruthie watched her with a mix of dread and iron loyalty. Dustspill Ridge had become a table no man could buy outright. A hand no drifter could beat with bullets alone. And as the wind curled through the shadows, carrying the hush of more trouble on the horizon, Wren Lockridge felt her bones settle around the truth she'd carved with lead and fear. Legends don't die easy, and sometimes the house is just another name for a woman too stubborn to fold. Dustspill Ridge did not sleep. Dawn rose on a town that smelled of oil, wood smoke, and stubbornness. The streets looked quiet from a distance, just another desert pit stop waiting for the sun to bake it dry. But behind shuttered windows, behind barn doors and the thick walls of the Silver Card Saloon, eyes stayed open. Rifles stayed loaded. Wren Lockridge stood by the saloon's front window, the Derringer holstered tight under her arm. Her stitches ached when she breathed, but she welcomed the hurt. Pain was a reminder, you're alive. Alive means you're still in the game. Hart walked up beside her, boots creaking on the floorboards. He poured 2 tin cups of bitter coffee from the pot that had gone cold an hour ago. "Telegraph operator says the railroad men are in Sundown Canyon. They'll ride in with their judge, their papers, their talk about right and wrong." Wren accepted the cup, holding it close to the glass. The street beyond looked empty. The wind pushed a tumbleweed across the road, the only thing out there not carrying a gun or an agenda. "How many drifters still sniffing at our fences?" she asked. Hart's grin was sour. "Enough to fill a church. None of them brave enough to push it yet. They're waiting to see if the suits win." Easier to rob a corpse than a fighter. Behind them, Ruthie yawned as she came down the stairs, her hair tied back in a short braid. She held a battered ledger in one hand, Wren's old account book, pages brittle at the corners, numbers scrawled in her father's scratchy hand alongside new lines in hers. "Morning," Ruthie said. She glanced at the window. "Or whatever you call this." Wren turned, taking in the girl's shadowed eyes, the rifle slung too big on her shoulder. "Did you sleep?" Ruthie shrugged. "Dreamed about a world where we didn't owe 3 months' supply bills to men who want us dead. I woke up, so." Hart rumbled a laugh. "Dream small, kid. Hurts less when it goes sour." Wren said nothing. She took the ledger from Ruthie's hand, flipping through the pages. Feed, ammunition, the new fence timber. They'd never paid for because Carson's men burned the order on its way in. All debts that could be called in by anyone with a badge or a lawyer's tongue. Cora pushed through the saloon doors just then, her duster catching on a nail, tearing at the hem. She carried a canvas bag that clinked when she set it down. "Morning, sinners," she drawled. "I made a round of the ranches, pulled what we could. Ammo, powder, some coin. Not enough, but better than nothing." Wren set the ledger on the bar. "It's never enough. Not if they come with paper and law behind them." Cora leaned in, her voice low. "Law's just a name for who's holding the bigger stick." Hart's fingers drummed the cup's rim. "So what's the plan when they ride in? Smile for the judge? Pretend we're civilized folks who can't smell the blood? On their boots?" Wren's eyes drifted to the poker table. Her father's chair sat empty, the cushion torn at the corner where his boot used to catch when he leaned back to bluff some drunk ranch hand out of his last silver dollar. The image rose in her mind like smoke, her father's laugh, the rattle of the deck, the Derringer tucked in his boot. "People like that," she said softly. "Believe in what they can sign, stamp, and put in a safe. They forget the rest of the world doesn't fit on a piece of paper." Ruthie frowned. "So you're saying we, what? Burn the courthouse?" Wren snorted. "No, but we show them we know the cost. We make the cost bigger than the profit." Hart grinned, teeth white against his unshaven jaw. "That's a hell of a bluff, Lady Ace." Cora barked a laugh. "And if they call it?" Wren met her eyes. "Then they learn what my father did. Sometimes the cards don't matter. It's the hand that deals them." They lined up along the street when the railroad men came. 3 black coaches with polished wheels rolled through the dust like coffins on parade. In front, a man in a town suit sat high in the driver's box, boots gleaming under the sun. Next to him, the judge robes flapping like a crow's wings. Behind the coaches, riders fanned out railroad guards, 6 guns on their hips and the smirk of hired hands, who never had to clean up the bodies they left behind. Wren stood dead center of the street. The wind caught her coat, flapping it just enough for the judge to see the shine of the Derringer tucked at her ribs. The coach halted 10 yards away. Dust settled around the wheels. The suited man climbed down, brushing the grit from his sleeves. His face was soft, young, and smug enough that Hart whispered under his breath, "That one bleeds easy." The judge stepped out behind him, boots sinking in the dirt. He looked old but sharp, eyes like nails in a coffin lid. He held a scroll of paper that glowed white against the dry earth. "Miss Lockridge," the judge said, voice carrying like church bells in an empty graveyard. "You stand on land you have no rightful claim to. This town owes debts that can't be paid. This saloon is collateral for what you could not provide. As of this day, it belongs to the Denver and Western Rail Consortium." A hush fell. The folk on the porches, rifles at their sides, glanced at each other. Ruthie's hand drifted to the rifle on her shoulder. Hart's boots shifted, weight coiled tight. Wren said nothing. She stepped forward once, boots crunching the grit. "No." The judge lifted his chin. "Pardon?" Wren's hand rested on the Derringer's grip. "No, you don't get to own this. Not with your ink. Not with your guns. Not with your dead men's boots tracking blood up my porch. The railroad man sneered. You think you can stop progress, Miss Lockridge? Wren's grin was sharp enough to cut wire. Progress? Is that what you call it when you come for what we built? When you send dogs and ghosts and scraps of paper? To do what your bullets couldn't? The judge unrolled the paper, the seal bright red as blood. This is the law. Wren drew the Derringer. The click of the hammer echoed off the walls like a church bell striking the hour. And this, she said, voice calm as a Sunday prayer, is Dustbill Ridge. If you want the house, come take it. The hired guns shifted. Hands twitched near. Holsters. The suited man swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing. Hart stepped forward, rifle up. Ruthie swung hers into the crook of her arm. From the porches, the townsfolk came out one by one, wives, ranch hands, old drunks who'd sworn never to. Lift iron again. Every barrel pointed down the street. The judge's eyes flicked from face to face. From Derringer to rifles to the sharp edge of hate carved into a town that refused to be bought. Go home, Wren said, soft but clear. Tell them the table stays open. But the house? The house never folds. Silence. Then the judge snapped the scroll shut, his hand trembling at the wrist. The suited man climbed back onto the coach, boots dirty now with Dustbill's grit. The hired guns pulled their horses around, eyes downcast. They knew, you don't take a town like this. Not when the dealer's still standing. As the coaches rolled away, Ruthie let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. Hart turned to Wren, eyes shining with something between pride and disbelief. You think they'll come back? He asked. Wren holstered the Derringer. Always. She looked at the street, her father's cards still waiting on. The saloon's table inside, the ledger's debts unpaid but written in the ink of the living. Not the dead. Let him try, she said. We've got more hands to play. Dustbill Ridge did not breathe easy. Not when the railroad men rode away. Not when the judge's fancy scroll was rolled tight again and locked behind iron coach doors. Because everyone who stood on that sun-cracked street knew what Wren Lockridge knew. The law comes back with a sharper edge when you break it in front of witnesses. Inside the Silver Card Saloon, the air was thick with the ghost of a gunfight that hadn't happened. Boots scraped the floorboards. Old Walt coughed from his corner, the sound bouncing off whiskey bottles that rattled on their shelf like teeth in a loose jaw. Wren leaned on the bar, a strip of fresh bandage under her sleeve where the stitches pulled at her skin every time she drew breath too deep. Her hand hovered near the Derringer. It always did these days. Ruthie paced near the front window, peeking through the boards. Her face was tight with something that looked like victory, but felt like dread. They're gone. For now, what's to? Stop him from coming back with more paper? More law? Cora Daltrey laughed from where she sat, boots up on the table. Nothing stops the law when it smells money, kid. Paper's cheaper than lead. They just learned lead costs more than they want to pay. Hart leaned in the doorway, rolling a toothpick in his teeth. Word's already spreading. The drifters are leaving town. The bounty hunters, too. They don't like the smell of a fight where the whole town stands behind the dealer. Wren's eyes didn't leave the street. Good, let the next gang. Here Dustbill Ridge ain't for sale. Or rent. Or easy pickings for men with gold teeth and fancy seals. Ruthie crossed her arms. We won. Why doesn't it feel like winning? Wren turned, her voice soft but sharp as a card's edge. Because there's always another hand. They met that night behind the saloon. No whiskey, no laughter. Just oil lamps and the sound of Cora's boot heel tapping out her worry on the hard-packed dirt. A map lay across two barrels, old fence lines marked with chalk. Trails scratched into parchment like spiderweb cracks in a bottle. Hart pointed with the barrel of his revolver. They'll try to come quiet next time. No judge, just men who don't sign their names, Ruthie snorted. We burn 'em out again. Same as Yarrow, same as the Ashdown boys. Wren said nothing. She ran her fingers over the map, the lines and crossings. Like veins under skin. She could feel her father's ghost at her shoulder. The way he used to tilt his hat back and mutter, "Don't trust a man who never folds. He's either a fool or a ghost himself." Cora dropped a bag onto the barrels. Coins clinked. Not much. A few silver dollars. A handful of gold teeth pried from. The mouth of a dead drifter who'd bet wrong on Dustbill. "You got enough for new powder, some fence wire," she said. "Won't cover lawyers. Or bribes. Or a judge who'll stay bought when the railroad doubles the price." Ruthie's voice rose. "So what do we do? Wait for them to take it piece by piece?" Her fists trembled against the map. "They come for the creek, then the land, then the saloon." "No." Wren's voice cracked through the yard like a whip. "They come for me, for the story. For the last ghost who doesn't know when to lie down." Silence fell. Hart's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" Wren looked at each of them. "I'm saying, I write out, meet 'em on the trail. I talk. I make 'em bleed ink before they bleed us dry with iron." Her mouth curled in that half-smile that never reached her eyes. "Might be they want the Lady Ace more than they want this town." Cora's face darkened. "You'd walk into their camp alone? That's not bluff. That's suicide." Ruthie stepped closer, defiance sharp in her spine. "You're not riding alone." "Not this time." Wren's laugh was soft. "I won't let this place be bought or bombed to ash just to keep my name alive in campfire stories. I don't care what they print in Sundown Canyon." Ruthie's voice dropped to a whisper. "We care." They rode before dawn. 4 riders. Wren, Ruthie, Hart, and Cora. Dustbill Ridge watched from behind boarded windows, from the shadow of fences hammered together with more hope than wood. They knew what this was, a last ride, or the hand that turned the odds for good, the trail. To Sundown Canyon cut through scrub and red rock, the wind cold enough to sting their eyes. They made camp near an old wagon wheel half buried in sand, where Wren checked the Derringer, cleaned each chamber until it gleamed in the sunrise. Hart leaned against a boulder, watching the horizon. "Think they'll talk?" Wren shrugged. "Talk's cheaper than killing me in front of a judge. They'll think they can offer me gold, land somewhere else. A quiet grave with my name on it." Cora snorted. "And you'll tell him what?" Wren's thumb brushed the hammer. "That they can buy my blood, but not my home." Ruthie's voice cracked. "And if they draw instead?" Wren's smile was all teeth and history. "Then the Lady Ace shows 'em what hand they're playing. The railroad's men came at dusk. They didn't ride up loud. They didn't wear badges. Or uniforms this time. Just suits that didn't fit the dust and pistols that did. They sat on horses that looked as worn and lean as the men who held the reins. Man at the front wore a black hat with a brim so wide it shadowed his whole face. His voice, when he spoke, was as slick as a snake's belly on wet rock. "Miss Lockridge, you're far from your bar." Wren stood, boots planted wide in the scrub, Derringer loose in her hand. "So are you." The man in the black hat smiled. "Railroad's willing to forgive what you owe. Drop the title. Pack your people up. Ride anywhere else. You'll find a deed waiting. Land twice as fine as this hole." Wren didn't flinch. "And Dustbill?" "Progress," the man said. "Tracks, freight. A town that never had a chance made useful at last." Ruthie spat in the dirt. "Useful for who?" The man's smile flickered. "For everyone." Wren's thumb cocked the Derringer's hammer. "Tell me what happens if I say no." The riders behind him shifted, eyes flat. Guns ready but not yet drawn. "You won't," the man said. "You're a smart girl. You know what they say about legends. They're worth more dead." Hart's laugh rumbled low. "Try her. Find out." Silence stretched until the wind cut through it. The man in black leaned forward, face half hidden by that wide hat brim. "Last chance, walk away." Wren's grin was soft and terrible all at once. "No, you first." The Derringer roared. One shot. The black hat jerked back off the man's head. A strip of hair torn bloody at the temple. He didn't fall, just reeled. Stunned, as Wren took one step closer. "You're on my land now," she said, voice like broken glass. "My rules, my game. You think you own me?" Dustspill Ridge don't fold, and neither do I. The railroad men drew. Hart's rifle cracked. Cora's shotgun barked once, twice. Ruthie's revolver bucked in her fists. Dust rose around the horses. Men screamed. Iron sang through dusk. When the gun smoke cleared, 4 riders still stood. And the man in the black hat lay face up in the dust, eyes wide as the stars that began to bloom above him. Wren holstered the Derringer. Her shoulder burned, blood soaking the edge of her shirt where a stray shot had grazed her. But her eyes were sharp, fixed on the hills where shadows fled back toward the tracks. "This town stands," she whispered. "This house stands. And if they want it," she touched the Derringer's grip, its cold weight and oath in her palm, "they'll have to pry it from my dead hand." Ruthie stood at her side, breathing hard, eyes fierce in the growing dark. "And they'll find out," Wren finished it for her. "The house never folds." Behind them, the wind carried the hush of more trouble coming. But Dustspill Ridge would be ready. The dealer was still standing. And the game would never end while she kept her hand on the cards. Dawn broke over Dustspill Ridge like a blade sawing through raw hide. The sky was the pale blue of an old bruise. Down on the street, the ash from yesterday's standoff still lingered in the cracks between the boards. There were no bodies left. Hart and Cora had seen to that before the sun rose, but the story stuck to the walls of the silver card. Saloon like blood in the grain. Wren Lockridge sat at her usual table, her arms stiff in a fresh sling, the Derringer laid out in front of her. She turned the chambers slow, thumb brushing the worn metal like a rosary. Outside, Ruthie and Hart argued about the new fence posts that needed driving. Cora was up the street, talking to ranchers who had once sworn they'd leave this Dust Bowl behind. Now they stayed. Because they were too stubborn to run. Or because they knew if they did, the legend that protected them would die in their footsteps. Hush settled inside the saloon. Old Walt poured himself a whiskey from a bottle he didn't pay for. He watched Wren like she was a snake coiled behind glass deadly. Fascinating, and proof you didn't always get what you deserved. He raised his glass. To the Lady Ace. May the next fools think twice. Wren didn't smile. She tapped the table. Once, a habit from her father's card games, a sign the hand was done. No fools ever think twice, Walt. That's the problem. By midday, word came down the trail. A rider on a lathered horse, his eyes wide as dollars, his mouth a smear of dust. He dropped from the saddle in front of Hart, gasping. New men, not drifters, soldiers, hired by the line. They got wagons, tents, surveyors. Hart cursed under his breath. They're building the camp. The rider nodded, wiping sweat from his neck. They say they'll lay track through the ridge come spring. They say the judge signed it proper, back in Sundown Canyon. Ruthie spat in the dirt, so paper beats guns. Wren stepped out into the sun, her shadow long on the dry earth. Paper only beats guns when the guns are quiet. She slipped the Derringer back in its holster. Her stitches itched under the sling, a reminder that even the house takes hits. But she didn't flinch when she pulled the brim of her hat low over her eyes. "Cora," she called down the street, "round up the hands. No more drifters, no more guessing. We find out who signed what, who they paid, and where they're weakest." Hart cocked an eyebrow. "You're gonna take on a railroad contract with 4 rifles and a whiskey tab?" Wren's grin was small but fierce. "They want to play law? Fine, we'll play law, but on our terms." Ruthie caught her arm as she passed. "Wren, what happens if they bring the real army?" Wren's eyes were pale as cold steel. Then the army finds out they're marching into a town that never folded. When bullets were cheap and the graves were shallow. They spent 3 days riding to Sundown Canyon, shadows flickering along dry creek beds, across broken ridges where rusted fence wire clung like old scars. Hart went ahead, bribing barkeeps and old telegraph men for scraps of news. Cora rode with Ruthie, a shotgun tucked under her coat like an ugly promise. On the 3rd night, they camped under a half-dead cottonwood near the river bend. The fire burned low. Wren sat with her back to the trunk, the Derringer across her knee, her eyes never closing for long. Ruthie squatted beside her, a battered letter in her hand. "I found this in the mailbag back at the saloon. It's from your uncle." Wren's jaw flexed. "That bastard's been dead 10 years. Ruthie shrugged. "Someone's using his name. Says they're owed a cut of the town. That your father sold the land out from under you before he died." Cora growled from her blanket. "Figures. Blood never stays clean when there's gold in the dirt." Wren took the letter, running her thumb over the seal. It was cracked and fake as the men who'd come to collect it. "We'll see how they talk when they see the house doesn't close just because they stamp a piece of paper." Ruthie touched her shoulder. "We're with you." Wren's eyes flicked to the fire. "I know, and they're going to hate that more than any bullet I could fire." In Sundown Canyon, the courthouse smelled of sweat and ink. A clerk with spectacles perched on the end of his nose stammered when Wren walked in, her sling still stiff with dried blood, her coat dusty from the road. "Miss Lockridge, they're in session. You can't just." Wren shoved the door wide. The judge from the street sat behind his polished bench, the railroad men lined up like crows on a fence. Papers stacked neat, red seals like drops of old blood. Cora barred the door behind them. Hart and Ruthie flanked the aisle. Wren stepped up, boots echoing off marble that smelled too new for a town this old. "You think you've won? Because you got your ink on paper?" The judge's face pinched tight. "You're out of order, Miss Lockridge." She slapped the letter from her uncle onto the bench. "You got your fancy deeds and your dead man's name. You think that means this town will kneel?" One railroad man sneered. "It's the law, girl. The army'll come if you push it." Wren's laugh cracked through the room. "Then tell him to come. Tell him to find out what happens when you poke a house that won't fold." She turned, her eyes sweeping the men who'd sold her father's land twice over, who counted her people's graves before they were dug. "Dustspill Ridge stands," she said. "The Lady Ace stands. And the next man who thinks a piece of paper beats a town that's buried better men than you." The Derringer's hammer clicked. The judge flinched. The railroad men paled. "Can write his own obituary first." Outside, the wind picked up, whispering along the streets of Sundown Canyon, carrying the taste of something sharp and unyielding. Not legend, not ghost, just the promise that the hand wasn't done. And the house, cracked and battered though it was, would never close. Dustspill Ridge never slept easy, but it didn't sleep at all the night Wren Lockridge rode back from Sundown Canyon with Hart, Ruthie, and Cora at her side. Word of the courthouse confrontation traveled ahead of them like a spark in dry grass. By the time the 4 riders came through the broken east fence just before dawn, lanterns flickered in every window along Main Street, and eyes watched from behind drawn curtains. Folks who once called her ghost or gambler now called her something else, something that tasted like hope and danger at once. Inside the Silver Card Saloon, the battered card table sat cleared of chips and whiskey glasses. Instead, the map of the ridge sprawled across it, weighted down by spent shell casings and the last unbroken bottle of good bourbon in town. Wren stood over it, her injured shoulder drawn tight in its sling, the Derringer holstered under her arm like a beating heart. She could pull out any time she pleased. Ruthie perched on a stool, boots dangling, hands busy reloading rounds she'd scavenged from the back room. Her eyes darted to the door every time the wind rattled the boards. Hart paced the length of the bar, a rifle slung over one shoulder, boots echoing over the floorboards that creaked like tired bones. They'll come fast now. Not drifters this time, not a handful of hired guns. Real enforcers, deputies, hell, maybe even a platoon if that judge has friends in the right places. Cora leaned against the far wall, shotgun across her knees, a grin that didn't touch her eyes. Let 'em come. They'll find out what we did to the last crew that thought paper beats iron. Wren's voice was low, carrying more steel than volume. They're not coming for the saloon anymore. They're coming for the idea. If they kill the Lady Ace, they kill the story. The house falls when the dealer's gone. Ruthie shook her head, face pale but fierce. No, they kill you, they make the legend bigger. We make sure they don't get to write the ending. Wren's eyes drifted to the map lines, sketched in whiskey-stained ink. Marks for old fence lines, hidden gullies, spots where her father once buried powder kegs when the ranchers fought over water rights. Memories flickered behind her eyes. Her father's laugh when he won a hand. The fear in his voice when he whispered, "Some debts don't stay paid." She touched the Derringer's grip, the old steel cold and comforting. No more waiting, we draw the line tonight. If they want to test the house, they're gonna learn every stone, every fence post, every damn grain of sand out here belongs to us. Hart leaned in, bracing both hands on the table. You got a plan that doesn't end with us all buried behind the saloon? Wren's smile was sharp, tired. We don't die here. Not all of us. We bleed him instead, slow, steady. Make the cost bigger than the deed's worth. Cora laughed, rough as gravel. So we fight a siege with half a box of shells and a town that's got more ghosts than cattle? Ruthie glanced up. We've got more than that. We've got a reason. The words fell into the hush like a promise. Wren nodded once, the map's edges curling under her fingers. They spent the day burying dynamite in fence lines, hammering planks over broken windows, stringing lines of wire across the creek beds. Ruthie and Cora rode from homestead to homestead, warning every soul with a spine that the fight was theirs too. Some packed up to leave. Most stayed, huddled in barns with shotguns resting on their knees. Hart gathered what men he could find who still remembered how to hold a rifle the right way. They drilled behind the saloon, taking turns firing into old feed sacks stacked against the corral fence. Each shot cracked through the dry air like a nail in an open coffin dot as the sun dipped low. Wren climbed the east ridge alone, boots sinking into the red dust her father once called God's final bluff. She sat on a boulder overlooking the town, the saloon's oil lamps glowing warm behind boarded windows, the wind carrying the low murmur of men and women who had decided they were done running. She thought of her father's words, the ones he whispered after he lost his last hand and left her a Derringer and a deck of cards no banker would ever trust. You only win when you play your hand, and you never fold when they've already counted you out. Wren breathed in the wind dry and sharp, carrying the promise of trouble just past the next rise. She felt the ache in her shoulder, the tug of stitches that wouldn't heal until the shooting stopped. And she smiled. Near midnight, the riders came. Not a full army yet, but enough to rattle the fences and spook the cattle that hadn't been rustled off months ago. 6 men on horses that looked better fed than the folk who still called the ridge home. They rode slow, like they owned the dust their boots kicked up. Hart met them at the edge of town, rifle across his back, eyes flat and tired. He let them see the barrels of the old shotgun poking out from the haystack behind him. One of the men, a deputy by the shine of his badge, spoke. First, we're here for Lockridge. We've got papers, sealed and proper. She comes quiet, the town stays quiet. Hart grunted, spat in the dirt. You boys want the Lady Ace? Step right up and ask her yourself. He stepped aside. Behind him, the saloon door swung open. Wren stood in the frame, coat hanging loose over the Derringer strapped to her ribs. Ruthie and Cora flanked her like shadows that could shoot. Wren called out across the dirt road. "You know my name, I don't know yours. That's the first mistake you made tonight." The deputy shifted in his saddle. "We've got the law, you've got a piece of paper," Wren cut in. "And we've got something older than ink, blood and grit and enough lead to show you what your seal's worth when the barrel's smoking." The riders hesitated. One's eyes flicked to the rooftops where Hart's men waited behind chimneys and water barrels, rifles ready. Another's hand hovered near his holster, fingers twitching. Wren stepped forward, boots scraping gravel. "You want to lay track? Do it on my grave. You want to write me off with your fancy words? Do it over the bones of every fool who tried before you." The deputy's voice cracked. "Don't be stupid, Lockridge. You can't win." Wren's laugh rolled out sharp and quiet all at once. "Maybe not, but I can make it cost more than you've got to spend." Behind her, Ruthie raised her rifle. The other watchers followed suit, barrels glinting in the moonlight. The wind hissed through the fence posts, whispering the same promise it always did. When the ridge was about to bleed, the house never folds. The lead rider spat a curse and wheeled his horse. "This ain't done." Wren didn't flinch. "No, it never is." They rode off into the dark, the thunder of hooves fading toward Sundown Canyon. For a heartbeat, the ridge stood silent, every soul listening to the echo of their own fear. Then Wren turned, eyes sweeping the line of faces in the lamplight. "Next time they come," she said, voice steady as iron, "they'll bring more than paper and a badge. They'll bring fire. And we'll meet it." Ruthie lowered her rifle, smile faint but real. "Let him try." Hart slung his gun over his shoulder. "What now, Ace?" Wren touched the Derringer's grip, thumb brushing the worn steel smooth. "Now, we finish the hand we're in. We watch the fences. We keep the powder dry." She looked out. At the horizon, where the moon rose over the dry hills like the glint of an unplayed card. "And we remind them that if they want the house, they'll pay in blood." Dustspill Ridge slept with one eye open. It always had, but now the whole town seemed to hold its breath between the beats of the wind. The sky stayed bruised for 3 days after the deputy's failed bluff, like the clouds knew they'd need to weep soon enough. Inside the silver card, Wren Lockridge sat with her arm bandaged fresh, her sling traded for a tighter wrap she could tuck under her coat when she had to show her face outside. She shuffled the same deck she'd used since her father's wake, a soft, worn thing with corners that whispered every scar she'd collected along the way. Hart stood near the window, the glass boarded tight but cracked enough to spy on the main road. Ruthie and Cora were gone for now, riding fence lines and bribing drifters who'd stayed too long to pretend they were just passing through. "You see 'em yet?" Wren asked, not looking up from the deck. Hart grunted. "Bunch of wagons on the horizon, 3 riders ahead. Men who walk like they're looking for a place to die or sell to the highest bidder." She tapped the deck once, slid it into her pocket. "Not many folks left who don't know what this place costs to hold. Good, the ones that stay might just mean it." Hart leaned his shoulder against the wall, eyes still on the road. "Paper didn't break us. Bullets didn't break us. They're going to try the one thing that's left." Wren raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Hart smiled like a man remembering the taste of blood. "Starvation." By sundown, the wagons had circled at the edge of the East Ridge, where the trail forked like a serpent's tongue, supply lines for the rail, food and water for the hired men the consortium had sent. A siege without a cannon, but it didn't take heavy iron to starve a town if you owned every trail and creek feeding it. Cora rode back before midnight. She was wet from the rain that hadn't yet reached the ridge proper, her hat dripping as she leaned her shotgun against the bar. Ruthie trailed her, hair plastered to her cheeks. "They've got men on every approach," Cora said. "Fresh ones." No badges this time, mercs, bounty boys, drifters looking for a cut. Someone's paying. Then to stay hungry. Wren poured her a whiskey, slid it down the bar. How long till they move? Ruthie pulled off her coat, wringing it out. Not long, they're scared. But the gold makes the fear worth it. Hart scratched his jaw. So they'll poke first, test us. Maybe pick a fight at the creek, burn a corral or two. See if we come out dumb and angry. Wren sipped her own. Drink, the taste bitter as old secrets. They're not wrong. But they're not right either. This isn't about feeding them bullets every time they scratch the fence. It's about making them pay for every inch they step forward. Ruthie's eyes shone, fierce even in the lamplight. Then what's the plan? Wren's grin was a ghost, quick and cruel. We bluff what we can't cover. We remind them that Dustspill Ridge didn't outlive the Ashdown boys and the Carson raid just to kneel for a siege. They started small. Hart and Cora led a pair of ranch hands under moonlight, pulling up the stakes of the supply tents the hired guns had built. Too close to the creek. By morning, the wagons were scattered and the drifters found themselves hauling half-frozen crates of dried beans uphill in the rain. Ruthie slipped into the edge of camp at dawn, dressed like a girl hunting for lost cattle. She carved the railroads, Mark into an empty barrel, and rolled it into the fire, laughing as she rode away with bullets whining past her stirrups. Each time, the hired guns tightened their circle, pulling closer to their fires. Each time, they lost a little more nerve. No one wanted to die for men who signed checks in Denver while they bled out under a mesquite bush dot. By the fifth day, the supply wagons still sat in the mud, but the men who guarded them looked more like pickpockets than mercenaries. And Wren? She stood on the saloon porch every dawn, Derringer in her sling, coat flapping in the dry wind. She smiled at every scout who rode close enough to see her. On the sixth night, a pair of riders came to parley. They knocked on the saloon door like they half expected it to explode. Wren let them in. She sat them at her father's old table, poured them a glass each, watched their hands shake as they unfolded a note stamped with the Rail Consortium's red wax seal. Miss Lockridge, the first one stammered, they're offering terms. New deed, you ride out, take your people with you. They'll give you twice the worth of this dump in Sundown Canyon, a fresh start. Wren sipped her whiskey. And the ridge? The second man winced. It'll be cleared, leveled. They want to lay track through to the coast. One line. One. Stop, no holdouts. Wren tapped her glass against the table. You know why this place never folded? The first rider shook his head. She leaned forward. Because every man who came to take it thought gold could buy grit. And every one of them found out grit costs more. She let that settle. Then she holstered her Derringer and stood. You tell them we've got no quit. And when they come again, they better bring a bigger hand. The riders fled before the sun rose. Behind the bar, Hart barked a laugh, slapping his palm against the bottle. Ruthie sat on the stairs, loading fresh rounds into her revolver. Cora laid her shotgun across her knees, eyes dark but shining with something like faith. Outside, the wind carried the rumor back to Sundown Canyon and farther west. The Lady Ace was still dealing, the house still stood. And the pot just got bigger for anyone stupid enough to sit down at her table. The days after the last parley stretched long and dry, like the land itself had forgotten how to rain. Dustspill Ridge stood quiet, but not idle. Each night, the wind carried the same whisper through the cracks in the saloon walls. Their Waiting, W.R.E. and Lockridge stood on the back porch of the Silver Card Saloon, the sunset painting her sling and coat in shades of fire. Below her, Ruthie argued with Hart about the fences again. Cora squatted by the half-dug trench they'd started behind the stables, shotgun balanced across her knees. You dig here, you're just giving them cover when they push in. Hart grumbled. Ruthie planted her fists on her hips. Or we use it to drag him in and close the door behind him. Ren, tell him." Ren didn't answer at first. Her eyes were on the horizon out where the railmen's campfires sparked at dusk. Pinpricks of threat that never quite moved but never went out. She'd counted 15 last night. This evening, she counted 23. "They're hiring more," she said, voice soft enough to quiet them both. "Outlaws with pockets full of company coin. They'll bleed it dry, but they'll try to bleed us first." Hart spat into the dirt. "They're trying to scare us." "That's all," Ren shook her head. "They're trying to see if we'll crack. A siege is cheap. It just takes time and stomach." She stepped down off the porch, boots hitting the packed earth with a finality that made Ruthie stand straighter. Ren slipped her good hand under her coat, resting her fingers on the Derringer's grip. "Then we'll remind them who's starving who." That night they rode. Not all the way to the camp, but close enough to let the hired guns see shapes moving in the dark. Ruthie took the lead, her revolver drawn as she carved their mark, the old playing card symbol, into fence posts and trees. A warning the company men would ride past every morning. Cora and Hart rode wide circles, leaving hoofprints that doubled back and vanished like ghosts. Ren moved through the brush alone, her shoulder burning where the stitches tugged under her shirt. She carried the Derringer cocked, half believing her father's ghost was still beside her, whispering the old lesson. "Make them think you've got more than you hold." At dawn, they slipped back over the broken fence line, their horses blowing steam into the pale light. From the saloon roof, old Walt raised a battered rifle in greeting. More scarecrow than sentinel, but sharp enough to squeeze the trigger if it came to that. Hart dismounted first. "Reckon they'll bite?" Ren ran her thumb along the Derringers. "Barrel. If they're hungry enough, they'll rush. Better that than waiting for them to dry us out." Ruthie tugged off her gloves. "What happens when they bring the real iron? The army? A whole damned company town?" Ren's smile flickered small and tired but unbroken. "Then they'll find out the same thing everyone else did. The house never folds." 2 nights later, the first shot cracked through the darkness, like God slamming a door. One of the new hires, young, hungry, too eager, had slipped under the fence line and come face to face with Cora's scattergun. He lived, but his hand wouldn't hold a pistol again. Word spread like wildfire through the Merc camp. Ren stood on the porch when they dragged him back, watched from the shadows as the outlaws argued over whose job it was to keep the kids from picking the wrong fights. She memorized their faces, the way they stood, who twitched when the wind rose. Ruthie slipped out beside her, boots muffled on the warped boards. "You look like you're planning something." Ren didn't look away from the glow of the campfires. "Not planning, counting. Every fool who thinks a payday's worth dying for leaves another crack for us to crawl through." Hart leaned out the saloon door, his voice low. "Won't be long now. They'll charge, or they'll crawl away broke. One way or another, the waiting's the worst." Ren holstered the Derringer with her good hand. "Then we remind them they're not the only ones waiting." The push came at dawn. A half-dozen men on horseback, 2 more on foot trying to find a gap in the trenches Ruthie had insisted on digging. Ren crouched behind the barn, her breath frosting in the dawn chill. When the first rider cleared the fence, Cora dropped him with a single blast. Hart's rifle cracked, dropping the second before his horse could buck. Ruthie's hands shook, but her bullets found their mark. Ren rose from the shadows, the Derringer already aimed. The last man standing, the fool who thought he could crawl under the corral, found himself staring down her barrels. He dropped his pistol. His knees hit the dirt. "Go back," Ren said, voice steady even as blood dripped from her side where the stitches had torn again. "Tell them the Lady Ace is still dealing, and this pot's too high for your kind." He ran. They let him dot by dusk. The siege looked more like a ghost town in waiting. No more fires at the camp's edge, just cold shadows and the wind scraping through canvas tents half collapsed by fear. Inside the silver card, Wren sat by the window, shoulder patched up again, coat draped across her knees. Ruthie leaned against the bar, reloading rounds by the lamplight. Hart and Cora played a half-hearted hand of poker at her father's old table, cards moving slow, the stakes nothing but old coin and the hush of shared breath. Wren's eyes stayed on the darkness outside, on the line between what they held and what they might lose. "They'll come again," Ruthie said, quiet. Wren's smile was soft, almost kind. "Good. Means the house still matters." She touched the Derringer's grip, the worn metal warm under her thumb. "And tomorrow we deal." Again. Dawn broke on Dustspill Ridge like an old scar splitting open again. There was no gunfire yet, just the hush that comes when every man and woman in a battered town holds their breath at once. Inside the Silver Card Saloon, Wren Lockridge sat at the corner table with her father's old deck spread in a fan before her. The cards were soft at the edges, smudged with whiskey and blood and the sweat of 100 desperate hands. She turned over a Queen of Hearts, her thumb brushing the faded print. One more mark in a house that wouldn't fold. Ruthie paced the floor behind her, boots thumping like a heartbeat. Cora leaned in the doorway with her scattergun propped on her shoulder, her grin carved sharp as a butcher's knife. Hart polished, his rifle in the corner, the oilcloth stained black from too many nights like this one. "They'll come at dawn," Hart said, voice low. "They'll wait till the light's good enough to see our heads." Wren didn't look up from the cards. "Good. Means they're still afraid to miss." Ruthie stopped pacing, hands balled into fists. "There's twice as many this time. You sure we can hold?" Cora snorted. "Girl, they've been throwing twice as many at us every time. If numbers won the hand, we'd be bones under the porch by now." Wren's mouth curled at the edge. "And they'll be bones before they break this house. Before the sun rose." They split. Hart and 3 ranch hands took the rooftops, rifles set against cracked chimneys and hay bales dragged up the stairs. Cora stalked the alley behind the saloon. A row of old powder kegs stashed behind broken barrels, another trick her father would have called insurance. Ruthie climbed the ladder to the loft, peering through the warped slats to the street below. Wren stood alone in the middle of the saloon floor. The oil lamps flickered around her, shadows dancing on the bullet-scarred walls. She strapped the Derringer tight against her ribs, the weight a heartbeat steady against her stitches. Then she pushed open the batwing doors and stepped out into the dawn. The street was empty but for the wind, carrying the scent of horses in sweat and fear. Down by the east fence, figures moved, shadowed men on horseback, others creeping through the brush. She counted 15, then 20, then more. Shapes too far to tell yet if they came with words or lead. Ruthie's voice drifted down from the loft. "They're bringing wagons, covered, probably full of powder." She hesitated, and one of them's carrying a flag, white. Hart barked a laugh from the rooftop. "White flag. These bastards think they're parley men now." Wren stepped off the porch, boots crunching in the frost. She didn't bother to draw the Derringer yet. Let him come. The lead rider came slow, hands raised, hat pulled low over eyes that didn't hide the fear. The man beside him, a rough bastard with a gold tooth and a grin like a knife, carried the white, scrap nailed to a stick. When they stopped 10 paces away, Wren tilted her head. "Got words, boys?" The gold-toothed man spat into the dirt. "Boss says there's one more chance. You walk. Whole town walks. Leave the deeds, the fences, the water rights, the well. Take your lives." Hart's voice echoed from the roof. "Take our lives, huh? Mighty generous." Ruthie's rifle clinked against the loft rail. "How much they paying you to say that?" The flag-bearer's eyes flicked to the rooftops, the loft, the alley shadows where Cora waited. More than enough. Wren's smile was thin as a razor. "And what happens when the next crew comes for your boss's coin? You think we're the last who'll fight for dust?" Goldtooth leaned forward, voice dripping smug. "You're the last who'll die for it." Wren's hand drifted to the Derringer. "Tell him the house still holds. Tell him the Lady Ace deals last." The man spat again. "Then die on your dirt." He turned the horse hard, the flag-bearer stumbling to keep up as they trotted back to the wagons waiting by the fence line. Wren watched them go, thumb stroking the hammer on the Derringer dot. At dawn proper, the push came. The first shots cracked. Off the rooftops, Hart's rifle barking twice before the echo died. Cora's scattergun roared from the alley, the blast rolling through the street like thunder. Ruthie's revolver spat flame from the loft window, each round a promise that the house was far from empty. Wren moved through the smoke and the splinters, boots steady on boards that had soaked up more blood than whiskey these last months. The Derringer kicked in her hand once. Twice one man dropped by the trough, another behind the hay wagon. The hired guns didn't break at first. They pushed to the porch, pouring lead through the saloon doors. But they didn't know the floorboards had been pulled and reset so Wren could move unseen. They didn't know about the powder kegs Cora had wired behind the stables. A spark lit the dusk behind the alley. Cora's grin caught the firelight as the barrels blew, sending the back fence into the air and the men behind it running for the creek. Hart's rifle cracked overhead, each shot punching another hole in the siege. Ruthie emptied her revolver, ducked, reloaded, and fired again. "They're pulling back," she shouted. "They're running." But Wren didn't look to the ridge line where the survivors fled. Her eyes were on the dirt by the trough, where the gold-toothed man bled into the frost. She walked to him, boots soft in the hush that followed the gunfire. He looked up at her, eyes wide. "You can't win. Another'll come. Another." Wren knelt, the Derringer cold under his chin. "Good. Then they'll find the house still stands." She stood as he went still, her breath rising in the dawn that carried the scent of spent powder and the promise of another day. Ruthie climbed down from the loft, boots squelching in the mud. Hart joined her at Wren's side, rifle barrel still smoking. Cora stepped out from the alley, hair singed at the ends but grin wide as ever. "They'll come again," Ruthie whispered. Wren smiled, soft and terrible all at once. "Then we'll deal again." The sun rose heavy and mean over Dustspill Ridge on what folks would one day call the day the Lady Ace ended the long game. The air smelled like spent powder, singed wood, and fresh fear. The kind of fear that hangs around when a town has won more battles than it should have survived. But everyone knows the war's got one last card to play. Inside the Silver Card Saloon, Wren Lockridge sat alone at her father's old table. The deck was spread before her, cards soft-edged and smudged by the same blood she'd shed to keep this place standing. She turned a king face up, then an ace. Her fingers paused on the last card. It didn't matter what it was. Some things you didn't gamble on. Ruthie watched from behind the bar, her revolver disassembled and spread out like a puzzle only she could solve. Hart was outside, boarding up the final windows, humming under his breath like a man who'd run out of curses. Cora leaned in the saloon's open doorway, shotgun balanced on her shoulder, eyes on the dusty road that ran out to Sundown Canyon. No drifters, no wagons yet, but the wind told them something was coming. "Paper didn't break us," Ruthie said, voice so soft it barely touched the lamp smoke drifting across the room. "Guns didn't break us. What's left?" Wren didn't look up. She turned the last card over. A joker. Fitting. Fear. That's always been the real gun to the head. Cora spat into the dirt. "Ain't a soul left on this ridge, scared enough to run now." Wren's mouth curved into that old half-smile. "No, but the men coming want to make sure that fear stays dead forever." They came at dusk, a dark knot of riders backlit by the falling sun. 40 by Hart's count, though none rode with a badge, no flags this time. No white claws waving promises they wouldn't keep. These weren't the hired drifters who got drunk and bragged about burying the Lady Ace under her own saloon. These were rail men in long coats, boots polished by other people's dust. They rode like they were bringing God's word to a town that had forgotten the rules. Ruthie peered through the cracked window. They brought dynamite. I can see it. Strapped to the saddles, Cora's voice was flat. They want the house to fall for good. Bury you with it. Wren's shoulder throbbed where the last fight had torn her stitches again, but she didn't touch it. Pain meant you were still. Here. She slid the deck into her coat pocket, stood, and checked the Derringer one last time. Then they learn a lesson my daddy taught me. You can take the table, you can take the deck, but you never, ever take the hand from the dealer. Hart stomped through the door, sawdust in his hair. We're ready. You say the word, we hold him at the street. Wren nodded. You hear that wind? They did. It came dry and sharp, scraping the porch posts like fingernails on a coffin lid. That's the ridge saying it's done being quiet, she said. When the first dynamite went off, the old fence line blew apart like matchsticks. Ruthie and Hart fired from the rooftop, knocking 2 men out of the saddle before the thunder even faded. Cora's scattergun barked from the back alley, her laughter cutting through the smoke like a promise. Wren moved to the saloon, like a ghost draped in gunpowder and grit. She knelt by the back door, the Derringer warm against her ribs. Each breath scraped her lungs raw, but her eyes stayed cold. She'd buried drifters and outlaws, judges and hired men, but she'd never buried a dream. And she wouldn't start. Tonight. The railmen pushed hard, riding right up to the saloon's porch. A stick of dynamite sailed through the window. Ruthie dove, kicked it back out into the street. It blew half a wagon apart and 2 men with it. Hart's voice cracked over the roar. They're falling back. But Wren knew better. She saw the shape in the smoke, a tall man in a dark coat, gold trim at his sleeves, boots that never knew. Mud, the consortium's lawyer or its butcher, it didn't matter. He carried no gun, only a ledger in his hand like a holy book. He stepped over the bodies in the dust, grinned up at Wren through the shattered window. You're outnumbered. Outgunned. Give it up, Miss Lockridge. Take the coin and ride. Or we burn you out. Wren pushed the saloon door open so he could hear her clearly. This house doesn't fold, he laughed. The house is matchsticks, lady. We have the torch. Wren's smile was soft and cold. Then light it. His face twitched. You want to die that bad? Wren stepped out onto the porch. Boots. Crunching on glass. Not bad enough to sell what's mine. You think you own what you buy? You think this land, these people, my father's bones, come with a receipt? Come take it. The man turned to his riders. Raised a hand. The wind rose behind him, whipping dust through the street. You think you're a ghost, he snarled. You think they'll remember you? Wren's eyes flicked past him. She saw Hart standing on the roof, rifle braced. Cora in the alley. A second scattergun at her hip now. Ruthie by the back door, her revolver steady for once. And every face at every window, a town that wouldn't let go. They don't have to remember me, Wren said. Just what I did, just that we never folded. The railmen rushed the porch. Shots cracked like thunder rolling down the canyon. Wren dropped the first man with the Derringer. The second hit the railing and didn't get up. Ruthie fired from the doorway. Her barrel a thread of flame in the dusk. Dynamite went off by the corral, sending fence posts spinning. Cora laughed as she fired into the firelight. Come on then. Come meet the house. Hart's rifle barked once, twice, 3 times. The man in the ledger coat stumbled forward, his fancy sleeves soaked dark. He dropped the book in the dirt. He stared at Wren, disbelief writ deep in his dying grin. They'll come again. She stepped down off the porch, boots in the dust. Good, the Derringer's hammer clicked. They'll learn. When his body hit the ground, the rest broke. The hired men dropped their rifles, stumbled back through the drifting smoke. Some tried to grab the ledger. Others just ran. No more shots fired, just the wind and the crackle of burning wagons, as the ridge exhaled one long breath it had been holding for years. Dawn found Wren sitting on the steps of the silver card, her father's deck spread on the porch boards. Ruthie sat beside her, boots muddy, revolver slack in her hand. Hart leaned on a broken post, his rifle across his knees, watching the sun rise through the haze. Cora staggered up the street, hair singed, coat torn, but her grin was pure devil. They're gone. The ones left don't have the belly to try again. Wren turned over the last card ace of spades. She let out a breath. The house stands. Ruthie wiped her eyes on her sleeve. What if they come back? Next month, next year. Wren gathered the cards, tucked them into her coat pocket. She looked at the sun rising over Dustspill Ridge, over fences hammered back together and graves dug deeper than any ledger could hold. Then they'll find the hand ready. She stood, the Derringer heavy but easy at her side. The house never folds. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.